This hearing this morning is part of the official business of the United States House of Representatives. This hearing is of the Subcommittee on Government Operations and the Federal Workforce, and we will come to order. I would like to welcome each and every one of you who are here today for this important event. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. And my opening statement is that I'm delighted the community come to this hearing today. We have very specifically received not only a warm welcome the mayor, but also many of you and my colleagues also who are from this island. This island is made up of beautiful people with a rich heritage, and we, all of us as members of Congress, come here with great respect for you. I want to you and each of you and my colleagues in the House of Representatives, the United States Congress, but also to the people of the United States of America. We watched with horror of the scenes, but you lived through it. It was you who had to suffer not only the problems that happened so quickly that enveloped, took lives, but also that night who had to take count of where you were. As Americans, we watched this and we were horrified. And so we today join with you as my colleagues to come here, I think, in an appropriate time to not only say we want to hear about this, but to let you know that we care about you. We care, each of my colleagues that care about what happens not only here in the rebuilding, but they care about each of you, not just as a people, but the lives that are lived here. So I think it's important that the way that you greeted us, we return that back to you and say, thank you. I'm pleased to be joined today by the ranking member for this hearing, the gentlewoman from California, Congresswoman Porter. Both she and I are making this trip because we feel compelled to come and not only hear what we need to hear, but to make this trip to assess for our subcommittee the things which we might learn, which may help others in the future. I'm also grateful for the assistance of my dear friend Ed Case. Congressman Case represents Hawaii's 1st Congressional District, and he is here with me. Ed, thank you for taking the time to be here. And I want to give special mention to Congresswoman Dakota, who the people of this beautiful Lahaina have had her in her prayers and dreams, but in her hard work for a long, long time. Thank you for taking time and to greet us as we got together last night to learn more about her thoughts and her ideas. She is equally a part of this success and what we're doing here today. She also knows that the 1-year anniversary of the fires that took 102 lives will not be forgotten and will be a part of the discussion and on our memory and minds today. But this is the jewel of the islands. We call this, because I think you do, the jewel of Hawaiian history and of culture. And from the people that I've spoken with that also were here to help, they believe that. On behalf of the House Oversight Committee, I want to extend our condolences to those of you who had those that were lost or injured, and express to you that I know that your loved ones, friends, and neighbors in the community you represent also today. And perhaps that is why you were here. By traveling perhaps a long way, me from Texas, others who came here from California, but those who represent the federal government, FEMA and other agencies, they have been on the ground here for a year. They feel like their lives have been benefited because they gave up service back to people in this island, and I wish to thank them at this time on behalf of the United States Congress and the American people for their work, their diligence, honesty, and the reasons why they came were to be of help and assistance. I think that should not be forgotten. So a sincere thank you also goes out to representatives of the Maui County government and the mayor's office, and the mayor who is here with us today, to make sure that what we're doing here today is not just here that we respect you and say thank you to you, but a working relationship that is being pushed a little bit more by the United States Congress being here. My ranking member, Mr. Mfume, who is from Maryland, cannot be here today. As you may know, he represents the area where the bridge fell in Baltimore Harbor. He has his own issue. And so it is today that I say to you, Mr. Mfume, as the ranking member of this subcommittee, simply cannot be here, but wishes that and he wants me to express his sincere wishes to each one of you, as I have done and as each of my colleagues will do. And certainly the point of view for the community itself. We expect to hear back things that may not be foreign to us, but that will be very special to you. And we're open to hearing that. I've heard from our members of the federal government who are here working that they've tried to respect not only the culture, but the feedback from people, and I'm proud of this. We also appreciate the need for housing, which existed before the fire and certainly now. To hear all too frequently the sons and daughters of those who call Hawaii home cannot afford to call it home for themselves anymore and have had to seek other places. And we came to get a sense of the beautiful history that this island and islands represent. Not just the culture, but the beauty that it represents. Some elements are simply uniquely Hawaiian. Yesterday, my staff from the Government Reform and Oversight Subcommittee, both Republican and Democrat colleagues of ours, toured the area to include sacred places to many people that are here on these islands. And it was important that we got that knowledge of the sensitivity, not only that each of you represent, but that we need to acknowledge and respect. And we do. Some of these elements are common to all of us, but some are very special, and we respect that. As I recollect the same case that I was aware of back in 9/11, we were dealing with very difficult issues. The sensitivity of people who lost thousands of lives. And while there's no way to look at a brother or a son or a daughter or grandparents or parents, there is the ability that we have to come and listen and uniquely understand their loss and to give them a sense of hope and confidence that us working together as Americans, we can make it work. But I understand and respect what we may hear today. I also want you to know that we have gathered together witnesses that we believe represent the best of not only the hard work that's being done here, but those who respect hearing back from the community, hearing back from elected officials. And while this may be a difficult part of the process to make decisions, I spoke to the mayor this morning specifically, and I said, Mr. Mayor, please know that while there's much work to be done, there are also decisions that I encourage you and your colleagues to be together so that it's done properly. And the mayor reminded me, Congressman Sessions, if you get 10 people in a room, you may get 10 answers. And I respectfully said back to the mayor, that is why we respect the ability of local people to make local decisions and to come up with an answer. This subcommittee's work regarding disaster recovery really began last year. It began last year with me as chairman of the subcommittee. That's not only government operations, but it's the federal workforce. As we held a field hearing in Fort Myers, Florida, into the recovery of Hurricane Ian. And we were very successful in not only approaching the community, but listening. And I think that we are doing the right thing today. Our intent in these hearings is now and was to specifically open our ears and to receive feedback. Feedback that may result itself perhaps in FEMA or other organizations learning new things, but the United States Congress seen firsthand. The United States Congress seen firsthand about, on a bipartisan basis, how we can work together on issues that are like this. Every disaster is different, and every disaster has its unique circumstances. Once again, that is part of the mission of this subcommittee, to be here to listen, to learn what was working, what might need to be done, and the needs that we need to be aware of. At the individual level, there are many that are seated here who bring tears of grief and perhaps uncertainty. While we cannot alleviate all the fears or take care of all the harm that has happened, we are here to say that you have come to the right place to hear a story of a group of people who came to try and help and to make better this island so that it is better prepared for tomorrow. And that is why we are here. We know that no federal agency, indeed no human institution, can address every concern. But we are here today under official business to do our duty as best we see it. And I will tell you, it is being done not just on a bipartisan basis, but it's being done with us together. I would like to, if I can, at this time, recognize I have 3 colleagues from the Democratic Party. We refer to them as a minority, but they are colleagues of mine. Well, we refer to each other in majority and minority. In this case today, I want to recognize the gentlewoman from California, and she will then offer the order in which she would choose to give their opening statements. But to let you know that Congresswoman Porter has taken time from the subcommittee to represent what we believe is important, and that is Mr. Nfume and these ideas, to make sure you know that we see this together. The gentlewoman is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sessions. I want to start by thanking the city of Lahaina, the island of Maui, the Civic Center, and everyone, the minority staff, the majority staff. It's a lot of work to bring Congress to the American people, but field hearings, in my opinion, are one of the most important things that Congress does, and maybe one of the most underused things that we do. Our work is here with the American people. Our work is not just in Washington, D.C. So it is a lot of work, and I want to appreciate the staff and everyone, both local and from Washington, who made this field hearing happen, and thank Chairman Sessions for his leadership and his work going back many, many months to plan and to hold this hearing at the most appropriate time with the best possible set of witnesses we could have to learn and understand how to move forward. As we all know too well in this room, 1 year ago, our country suffered a horrible tragedy when wildfire flames engulfed Lahaina, destroying everything in their path. And the damage was devastating. Families lost their homes, their livelihoods, their communities, and for many, their loved ones. We're here today in part to grieve with you and to acknowledge those painful losses. But we are mostly here looking forward to reinforce the federal government's continued commitment to helping Hawaii recover. When disaster strikes, Americans show up for one another to rebuild what we've lost. It matters how we rebuild and who we are rebuilding for. Survivors and families still struggle to find stable, affordable housing. Many families were already experiencing an intense housing crisis well before the wildfire a year ago. Competition with tourists, mainlanders scooping up properties to rent as vacation homes, combined with a lack of new construction, played a part in putting stable, affordable housing out of reach for many of the families who live and work here. The wildfires supercharged Maui's housing crisis. For starters, the destruction of a chunk of Maui's already limited supply of homes further exacerbated the imbalance between supply and demand, hiking up rents across the island, even for families who were not displaced. When FEMA began providing disaster relief payments to assist survivors, some landlords reportedly took advantage of the crisis by ousting their existing tenants so they could lease to fire survivors for a higher monthly rent. State leaders have worked to crack down on this abuse, but in many cases, the damage had already been done. As Chairman Sessions has already emphasized, this hearing is not about finger-pointing or playing a blame game. We are here on a bipartisan basis to examine the response from all levels of government to last year's wildfires and to learn so that we can apply what we have experienced here to improve future disaster response. One takeaway that I've gathered already is that the United States needs to center affordable housing in its disaster response. I think this was a lesson from Katrina as well. I think what happened here is showing we are still struggling to understand how to provide housing in the wake of disasters. Lahaina, like any area, has its own challenges and barriers to overcome in building affordable housing. But there are common root problems present from Hawaii to my home state of California. I represent Orange County, California. Expensive coastal property with geographic limitations, a lot of dependency on tourism. There's much in common, and we are struggling with many of the same root problems. We need Congress to step up and invest in affordable housing in advance of disaster so that we're not already in a shortage when we're trying to climb out. So I encourage Congress to think about passing the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. It currently has 125 Democratic sponsors and 114 Republican co-sponsors. The tax credits in that bill would result in building 2 million new homes. We could help unleash private capital for home construction by guaranteeing and securitizing the construction of 1 to 4 unit starter homes, just like the government already does for big apartment buildings, which may not be suitable, for example, in areas like Lahaina. We could invest in technology to make 3D printed building materials and reduce building costs by over 30%. We could center housing construction here to build component parts for houses, to be able to have high-quality housing built more quickly than is typical. And we could stop Wall Street hedge funds from scooping up all the affordable homes across our country and driving up prices for homeowners and renters alike. And we could reward cities and counties that take the step of making their building and zoning requirements more flexible. While we are going to rightly today focus on survivors who lost their homes in the wake of the fire, we are not doing enough to anticipate the underlying housing crisis that made the Lahaina wildfires such a profound shock to the housing market. So we must do more. Today we're here to listen and to bear witness. So thank you for your willingness to share your memories, your experiences, and your hopes, both painful and joyful, stories of both heroism and hardship. I'd now like to recognize my colleague.
If I could, please,
yes, of course.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. So without objection, I would like to have Congresswoman Dakota and Congressman Ed Case of Hawaii will be waived on the committee for the purpose of questioning today's witnesses at this subcommittee hearing. Both of these members of Congress have worked tirelessly, not only on behalf of the people of Hawaii from last year's wildfires, but also with their colleagues. They have made sure that we heard more about the stories that some respects are thrilling because it's talked about human endeavor and the people of this island and their desire to continue the work. So we waive them both on without objection. That is done. Now I have to come back to the gentlewoman.
This is a technical procedure so that they can be part of the committee. So really good job being in charge. That's why he's in charge today. I would now like to recognize my colleague, Representative Jill Takuda.
Thank you, Representative Porter, and mahalo, Mr. Chairman, for holding this field hearing today. You and I know that you have absolutely approached this hearing with the utmost sincerity and aloha. It could have been done many other ways. But for the way that you and your team have approached this, truly with the best of intentions and hopes in your heart for our community and our people, I am very grateful. And now, please, I hope you will both consider yourselves part of our extended ohana, which means you are always welcome back. But we all now have a shared responsibility in terms of how we move forward to support our community. Thank you again, Representative Porter, Representative Case, for taking time out of what is a very busy August district work period to come here and to directly listen from our constituents today. I'm also thankful, as I mentioned, to the committee, staff, and team that are in this room for their collaboration and work with our team and their hard work for organizing this field hearing and bringing it to Maui. Oftentimes, we summon people to Washington, D.C., as Representative Porter mentioned. It's about coming to you and meeting you where you're at. So mahalo to the teams that made this possible. You know, as you know, our community just commemorated the 1-year anniversary since the fires. And I have said many times that this has felt like both the shortest and the longest year of my life. But I am truly grateful, honestly, that during these extremely difficult times that I have been blessed to be surrounded by the very best of us. You know, people and organizations from across the state, from across the country and the world. They stepped forward and stepped up and truly cared for our community, and they have gone above and beyond to help us heal, recover, and now focus on rebuilding. From shortly after the fires, as you know, we've had members of Congress, from Chairman Westerman to former Speaker McCarthy and Minority Whip Clark, all come to Maui to express their strong support for our people. President Biden and numerous cabinet members have also been here, committed to marshaling a whole-of-government response to the disaster. And since then, the federal government has provided over $3 billion in direct support to Maui and its recovery. This field hearing is a valuable opportunity for us to reflect on the past year and refocus our efforts for what will continue to be a long and challenging road ahead. 1 year later, the greatest challenges we face are the ones that we can't see on the surface. Beneath the progress we have made are the wounds and the scars of a community still hurting and still grieving. Survivors are struggling to get back on their feet, to find and keep jobs in a local economy that will take years to recover, and to secure the finances necessary to rebuild their homes, their businesses, and their lives. In a sobering study done by the Hawaii State Rural Health Association, 45% of fire-impacted residents are seriously considering leaving Maui for other islands or another state. And across Maui County, a majority of residents know someone who has already left the island. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the Hawaii State Rural Health Association's report entitled The Struggles of Maui County and the Maui Wildfire Exposure Study's initial report entitled Community Health, Wellbeing, and Resilience, conducted by researchers at the University of Hawaii.
Without objection, they'll be entered in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These reports highlight the struggles and the pain points of recovery and rebuilding. They also identify key needs as well as opportunities. Getting this recovery right over the next months, years, and quite frankly, as I've said, generations, will require us as a local, state, and federal government and as a community as a whole to stay focused on the future. Central to the next phase of rebuilding Lahaina is the long-term recovery plan and development by Maui County. And while physical structures and streets may change, the strength and soul of Lahaina, we all know, are her people. And as the people of Lahaina determine what that future will be for this place, what it'll look like, what it'll feel like, what we will lift up, it will take a coherent vision and plan to make it a reality. To sustain that recovery, we will also need continued federal support. President Biden submitted his initial request for supplemental disaster funding last October and updated that request again this past June. This is where Congress can and must deliver immediately. Since our fires, disasters that we know have continued to strike across our country. We must replenish FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund and provide Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR, we love our acronyms, funds, and more. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the hearing record a recent letter from the Hawaii Congressional Delegation outlining our request for additional funding for housing, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and more.
Without objection, that will be included in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we continue our work to meet these urgent needs, we must never forget that Lahaina is not Lahaina without her people. They are the foundation of this community, and they must continue to be the focus of all of our efforts in this recovery. Over the past year, we have witnessed not just their grief, but their courage, and above all, their hope. Through them, the world has seen what it means to truly be Maui strong. To the members of the community gathered here today or watching online, this field hearing represents our commitment to Maui as Congress and the federal government remains unwavering. We will continue to be here, however long it takes, and I am grateful to my colleagues and the agencies gathered here today for their support thus far and well into the future. As many of you know, after the fires, I said I would take to the floor each time we're in session to make sure that Maui is never forgotten. Next week, I'll speak all 102 names lost and the names of the 2 missing on the floor of Congress. Their names and their lives forever enshrined in our history. This is a reminder that you will never, ever be forgotten, and we will not go away. Thank you, Mr. Chair, fellow colleagues, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Ms. Porter?
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize my colleague, Representative Ed Case.
Thank you so much. Aloha to everybody. I join my colleagues up here in saying a very special mahalo to each and all of you for coming here today, and all of you that are watching across our country with the sole intention of focusing on the needs of Maui and of Lahaina in particular. We really appreciate your participation because this is taking all of our effort. A special thank you to Chair Sessions and Ms. Porter for coming all this way to devote yourself here. Your comments in the opening statement indicate that you completely understand and that you completely get what the needs are and how we feel we need to approach those needs. So I really appreciate that. I also think it's important to say that among many great partnerships that it's taken to focus on Maui throughout this last year plus, your congressional delegation has been unified and working together throughout that period. Jill has obviously led that from the U.S. House side, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention Senators Schatz and Hirono, who have been a key part of this effort, and I know that they're here in spirit today. And I also want to say mahalo to our federal government. We're focusing today on the federal government's response, and we're doing that because the federal government has carried the heavy load of the recovery. And of course, many other people had a part in it, but today our job is to provide for congressional responsibility in terms of oversight and to ask the questions, what have we done well? What could we do better? And it's not just for the sake of Maui, it's to make sure that we take the lessons of each one of these disasters and responses into other disasters that will occur in the future. But one thing I do want to say, and my colleagues have alluded to it, and Jill talked about it directly, but the federal government and the federal agencies are ultimately people. And people have motivations. And I will say without a question that the people that have been in charge of the federal government's response have been competent and caring and dedicated people who have embraced and cared about Maui. And, this doesn't always happen in the federal government, but it certainly has happened here. And so as we ask the questions we're going to ask today, this is in the context of great partners, people that have cared, people that have tried to find the ways to address problems in our own way, and they deserve our recognition. So each and all of you from the federal government who have helped so much, mahalo so much for that. Obviously, at the one-year anniversary, we have done a lot. The federal government's total expenditures are closing in on $3 billion, or in that range in totality, including about $500 million in direct assistance to survivors. And obviously, we have much more that must be done. And so this is not over by a long shot. And it's clearly imperative that we continue to provide federal assistance as long as it takes, including our number one priority right now, which is supplemental disaster funding, which I have strongly supported through my work on the House Appropriations Committee, which funds our federal government. And this is a critical issue for us in Congress right now that we need to focus on, because on August 7th, FEMA was forced, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, Mr. Fenton here, who's become synonymous with FEMA, was forced to implement what's referred to as immediate needs funding, because the Disaster Relief Fund, which is how we have funded most of this response, we put a bunch of money into it. It is utilized for disasters wherever they might occur. And in this case, that DRF is now exhausted, and we're down to the last limits of it. And that's why FEMA has had to, because we've had a lot of disasters, not just Maui, across the country, we've had a lot of draws on that, and we're way overdue to replenish the Disaster Relief Fund. And so our number one priority really as a congressional delegation, I think it's fair to say, and the letter from Jill that Jill referred to from the delegation makes this point. The first and foremost thing we have to do is to replenish the Disaster Relief Fund as soon as possible, and we have asked for that in the tune of $20.9 billion. This is actually urgent right now. This is something that is happening in Congress right now that we hope to solve within the next 3 weeks by the end of this fiscal year, September 30th. So that's number one. And then number two, we need, as reference was made, to fund the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Fund. This is what we need and will access in order to actually rebuild Lahaina. And so these are the big picture issues that we face as we analyze the specific response. Your delegation and our friends and allies in Congress, including the two up here, are focused on the larger picture of the necessary federal assistance that we will need to finish this job. With that, I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses about what we've done well, what we need to do better on for Maui, and what the lessons are to be learned both for our own ohana and for our fellow citizens across the country as they face comparable situations. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. I'm very proud of my colleagues that have taken their time to not only be a part of this, but to make sure that we properly prepared. Today's subcommittee hearing will focus and feature two panels of witnesses. The first panel, which is already seated, will feature federal witnesses from FEMA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Small Business Administration's Office, and also the EPA. We believe they represent the heart and the soul of the work that needed to be done here, and we are calling upon them to give testimony today. I would like to introduce the panel, if I could, please. We have first the gentleman, Mr. Bob Fenton, who served as a regional administrator for FEMA Ridge Region 9, which includes Hawaii, since 2015. He brings together not only his knowledge and experience, but the background, the willingness, and desire to work with local people on serving answers that are best for them. Colonel Eric Swinson served as commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, St. Paul District, and he's done this since 2022. Colonel, we appreciate you taking time to not only be with us today, but to know that you have led the critical work that was very important for the last year to this island, and thank you. Mr. Francisco Sanchez, Jr. He serves as the Associate Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration, Office of Disaster Recovery and Resiliency, and I would put both of those words directly to him today, as we will, both on the words disaster recovery and resilience. Sir, we want to thank you for not only taking the time to be here, but your hard work and the people of your agency who've contributed to this important effort. And lastly, the gentlewoman, Cherie Peterson, who approached me earlier with a big smile, and I said to her, thank you very much. Thank you from the EPA perspective of being the Deputy Regional Administrator for Region 9, but for the hard work. And she had several employees that were with her, and she knew that when I said thank you, it was really on behalf of each of us that are here today and the American people. I'm delighted that you're all here. So, pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand to be sworn. And I will ask each of you, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please let the record, thank you very much. Please let the record show that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. You may now take your seat. We're delighted that you're here, and I would ask that we allow Mr. Fenton to please take his time. Mr. Fenton, as you know, we typically have a 5-minute opportunity that's available to witness. I'd like for you to take the time that is necessary. That does not include all day, but take the time that is necessary, because what we're trying to do today is not to rush through to 5 minutes, but to listen to you about the things that you have seen, that you understand, and things that you think these important members of Congress. By the way, we represent about 1% of the United States Congress that is here today, listening to you and here for the right reasons. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Porter, and Representatives Takuda and Case. My name is Bob Fenton. I'm the FEMA Region 9 Regional Administrator, and I also served as the Chief Federal Response Coordinator appointed by President Biden to oversee the federal response to these historic wildfires that swept through Kula and Lahaina in August of 2023. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding FEMA's continued efforts to help Maui recover from the deadliest wildfires to impact the United States in over a century. During this tragic event, 102 lives were lost and 2 remain unaccounted for. This pain of this kind of loss is deep and palpable across the island. Thousands of buildings and cultural heritage sites were also destroyed by the fires, including approximately 4,000 homes and the face of the sacred and historic town that was loved by all. In my 28 years with FEMA, I've seen numerous disasters destroy communities across the country. While some have been bigger in size, none have been as complex as Maui. My experience working in the Pacific has taught me a lot, mostly to listen more than I speak and to surround myself with cultural leaders I can learn from. It has also underscored the importance of ensuring that every federal employee who deploys here understands the uniqueness of the culture they are working amidst. Because of this, I requested a cultural advisor for Maui almost immediately after being tasked with overseeing this response. The Department of Interior sent a senior advisor for Native Hawaiian Affairs to advise us on intergovernmental relationships and interagency coordination, and to consult with the Native Hawaiian community in recognition of their special legal and political relationship with the federal government. In coordination with our federal partners, FEMA established a cultural protocol task force that focused on 3 things. First, enhancing our staff's understanding of the diverse cultural backgrounds. Second, raising awareness among affected communities about FEMA's assistance and procedures. And 3, incorporate cultural practices and considerations into the planning, implementation, and delivering of FEMA-supported services, operations, and programs for Maui. For example, the Cultural Protocol Task Force highlighted the need for debris removal permission forms to be translated into 11 languages. We knew that Lahaina was the capital of the historic Hawaii Kingdom, and sites of cultural importance were hidden beneath the ashes of the fire in Lahaina and potentially Kula. So we incorporated cultural experts to monitor debris removal operations. Like our cultural advisor, the cultural monitor shedded light on actions we can take in honor of the local community and rich history without compromising the speed of our response. In addition to leveraging cultural experts, FEMA has utilized expertise across our partnering agencies. For example, the U.S. EPA, who's here today, removed household hazardous materials. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is in the process of removing residential and commercial debris. To date, we spent over $1 billion in those activities to remove that debris and are on pace to have it completed by February 2025. As debris removal continues and we're encouraged by homes being built, we need to collectively work on accelerating the rebuilding. These hollow structures or fresh foundations are signs of hope. Housing on Maui is challenging, to say the least. Due to pre-existing housing shortages and infrastructure limitations, locating temporary housing for displaced survivors has been a critical component of our efforts since August 2023. Initially following the fires, over 8,000 survivors were accommodated in hotels as part of emergency sheltering efforts that was led by the state in coordination with FEMA and funded by us. Following the state's request for direct housing assistance from FEMA, a joint decision was made by FEMA, the state, and the county partners to temporarily house survivors in short-term vacation rentals through FEMA's direct lease program and other programs that the state sponsors. Short-term vacation rentals were prioritized due to their abundance and high vacancy rate on Maui following the wildfires. By January of 2024, the agency secured approximately 1,300 units with leases up to 2 years. FEMA is also temporarily in the process of procuring alternative transportable temporary housing units for survivors as they work towards their permanent housing solution. In collaboration with our partners, we are working to install these temporary housing units on a group site in Kilohana and on private properties of eligible residents who lost their homes during the wildfire. Temporary housing solutions are not one size fits all, so we continue to explore innovative ways we can to support Mayor Bison's priority of returning Lahaina people to their community in Lahaina as quickly and safely as possible. President Biden set the tone for the federal government's role and priority on Maui when he visited after the fire. The president emphasized that the community would lead Lahaina's recovery. The federal government would listen, learn, and support, and will do just that for as long as it takes. FEMA has provided over $3 billion in funding. We will continue to support Maui's recovery while being mindful of the funding required from the Disaster Relief Fund. However, there are times when the number of intensity of disasters nationally outpaces our appropriated funds. As a result of our dwindling disaster relief fund, on August 7th, FEMA implemented immediate needs funding. Under immediate needs funding, we are prioritizing life-saving and life-sustaining disaster responses and delaying obligations for longer work. Although we will continue to accept and process applications for longer-term work, FEMA will be unable to obligate funding until the disaster relief fund is replenished. You have our commitment that FEMA will move quickly to resume obligations paused underneath INF as soon as the disaster relief fund is replenished. In closing, I want to extend my deepest condolences to those individuals and families who lost loved ones in the fires. I hope collectively we can hold space for their grief today and in the days and years to come. I am grateful to Governor Green, Mayor Bison, the first responders, FEMA's teams, private nonprofits, and partner agencies for their adaptability, endurance, and genuine partnership through this response. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Gentleman yields back his time. Administrator Fenton, thank you so much for being here. Colonel Swinson, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Aloha. Chairman Sessions and distinguished members of Congress, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' response to the devastating wildfires of August 8, 2023. The fires razed historic Lahaina town, as well as 25 homes in the central Maui highlands. There were 102 lives lost, more than 1,550 properties destroyed, and significant damage to public infrastructure. Many of the affected residential properties were single-family homes that also contained 1 or 2 additional ohana homes or family homes on the lot. These housed the workforce, guests, and extended families of the people of West Maui, resulting in a greater impact on the people of Maui than the numbers might otherwise suggest. On August 9, 2023, FEMA issued the initial mission assignment to the Corps of Engineers to activate Emergency Support Function 3, Public Works and Engineering. This unlocked our vast emergency response resources. The next day, we mobilized a temporary emergency power planning and response team to restore power to the critical infrastructure, including water wells, pump stations, and emergency centers. To date, FEMA has issued the Corps 10 mission assignments totaling just over $1.15 billion. Soon after we started our temporary power mission, we started debris removal, an extensive and complex mission with an estimated cost exceeding $1 billion. The Corps, under FEMA, is leading this effort in partnership with the state, county, EPA, industry partners, and most importantly, our cultural observers who are experts in their INA, or land, and the area's diverse heritage. Initial debris removal began in Central Maui Highlands on November 7th, 2023, and was complete by January 19th, 2024. In Lahaina, debris removal started on January 17th, 2024. This past week, the Corps cleared fire debris from the last residential property, which is a massive accomplishment completed months ahead of schedule. The Corps has also cleared 60% or approximately 60% of commercial lots removed more than 3,100 vehicles, and removed 141 vessels from in and around Lahaina Harbor. Another significant effort was constructing a temporary elementary school to replace the destroyed King Kamehameha III Elementary School. We finished this temporary classroom, this temporary 30-classroom campus, complete with a dining facility, an administrative building, and several support buildings in March 2024. This facility was built in just 95 days and now serves 320 students, providing a much-needed sense of normalcy for the community. To address the acute housing shortage, FEMA tasked the Corps with preparing sites for temporary housing. On April 11, 2024, the Corps awarded a contract to a Dawson subsidiary, Actarius, LLC, a Native Hawaiian-owned small business for site preparation in Lahaina, named Kilohana, a Hawaiian word that means lookout. Kilohana will accommodate 169 homes and single families. We anticipate completing site work to include a sewer main extension to the county's sanitary lift station by October 28th of this year. In August 2024, FEMA issued the Corps a mission assignment to facilitate the installation of temporary housing units on personal property. A challenging mission, but one with the potential to deliver exactly what residents have asked for, a housing solution that gets them back on their Aina. The success of our mission is largely due to the close collaboration between all stakeholders, including Native Hawaiians and other residents of Maui. This partnership was crucial in ensuring the safety and well-being of Lahaina and Kula residents and supporting their ability to rebuild. Employing local contractors, including Native Hawaiian-owned businesses, has been vital in fostering community trust and contributing to the local economy during the recovery. Acknowledging Lahaina's deep historical and cultural significance, the Corps worked closely with cultural advisors and was sensitive to Native Hawaiian traditions, including pule, or prayer, before missions and significant events. These practices, led by cultural monitors, honored the land and the people, fostering trust and respect with the community. This approach was critical in ensuring that our efforts were not just about rebuilding infrastructure, but also about doing our part to heal a community deeply rooted in its heritage. Building trust with the local community and finding a suitable location for debris storage were significant challenges. Without trust, residents would be hesitant to sign up to our debris removal program. That would have delayed the removal of hazardous debris and the recovery process. We built trust by using our public affairs teammates to reach across all media, by being present at weekly community meetings, and by reaching out to community elders. Our contractors also hired local labor and local cultural monitors. When a work crew comprised of locals arrived at a residential lot, residents felt a personal connection to the debris crew. In some instances, family members were clearing family parcels. This built credibility within the community and encouraged others to sign up for the debris removal program. In late 2023, we gained access to a former cinder mine in West Maui for our use as a temporary disposal site. That real estate transaction gave us and our contractor the land needed to construct and operate a site capable of holding all of Lahaina's fire debris. The West Maui TDS, though controversial at first, has enabled the Corps to rapidly clear fire debris from Lahaina. As the commander of the Corps mission from Maui, from February to August 2024, it is an honor to serve this community and to serve alongside dedicated public servants at all levels of government. In 6 months, we, the Army Corps of Engineers, finished the temporary school, completed all residential debris removal, and are poised to complete the remainder of our work by the end of February 2025. More than that, the Corps team worked together with the people of Maui, with every team member serving as an ambassador to this community. To date, we have had over 1,300 USACE ambassadors support this recovery mission. In conclusion, the Corps is fully committed to the recovery and rebuilding of Lahaina Town and all affected areas in Maui. We will continue to work tirelessly to restore hope and stability to the community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions you may have. Mahalo.
Gentleman yields back his time. Colonel Swinson, let me say this to you and other members of the United States Armed Forces that today serve not only our great nation, but are also here and present and have taken part in this. Thank you. Thank you to the United States Armed Forces for your service, to your families, and to the time that you have devoted this. I'd also like to add, because I failed to earlier, and to law enforcement. Men and women of law enforcement, men and women of federal, state, and local law enforcement have devoted themselves to the others' lives and would put their own life at risk. And I want to say that the same as about the military. It's part of what you do, but it's part of what you've done proudly. So I say thank you to the United States Armed Forces as well as our law enforcement partners. Thank you very much, sir. We now want to go to Administrator Sanchez. Sir, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Aloha, Chairman Sessions and distinguished committee members. Thank you for the invitation to discuss the Small Business Administration's response to the Maui wildfires. And my deepest gratitude to Representative Takuda and the Hawaii delegation entirely for the warm hospitality and gracious welcome, not just to beautiful homeland, but for the past year, not just today, for welcoming our teams to work together to lift Maui and its people up. I am Francisco Sanchez, the Associate Administrator for the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience, and on behalf of SBA Administrator Isabel Casillas-Guzman and the entire agency, please know that we deeply appreciate your support of our disaster mission. Prior to joining SBA, I was the Deputy Homeland Security and Emergency Management Coordinator for Harris County, Texas, the third largest county in the nation, which includes the city of Houston. And I've had the responsibility, coming from the Gulf Coast, to be on command staff for 4 of our nation's 10 most costly natural disasters, as well as to provide oversight for security operations of many high-level events, including 2 Super Bowls, 3 World Series, and multiple national security events. Over the course of that time, I also served as a firefighter for nearly 10 years. And I know firsthand the devastation and destruction that fire can cause. And what I saw in the immediate hours after the fire was put out in Lahaina was certainly one of the most tragic scenes that I have witnessed. As I walked along Front Street, some of the ground and some of those parts of the street were still smoldering. Lives, homes, and livelihoods were entirely erased. And the task at hand was and remains to be monumental. Today, Chairman, we come full circle. Just more than a year ago, at a hearing much like this one in Florida for Hurricane Ian, we discussed SBA's commitment to fulfill its solemn obligation to help disaster survivors. Today, the greatest transformation of SBA's disaster enterprise in the agency's nearly 71-year history is largely complete. We are better prepared today than we have ever been to help communities recover from disasters. The hearing was on August 10th, the same day President Biden signed the major disaster declaration for Maui, and I would be on the flight the following morning to join Administrator Guzman and FEMA Administrator Criswell here on the island the next day. SBA has provided more than $405 million in loan offers. More than $90 million has been dispersed already to disaster survivors, and under Administrator Guzman's leadership, SBA's sweeping reforms have been integral to our Maui response. In July 2023, just days before the fires, SBA updated disaster loan limits for the first time since I was graduating high school nearly 30 years. These increases have helped ensure that disaster survivors here and elsewhere have the sufficient funding they need to recover and to rebuild. Limits for a homeowner's primary residence were raised from $200,000 to $500,000. More than 26% of the initial loan approvals in Maui were above the previous administrative limit of $200,000. Because of these changes, there is an additional $101.9 million approved on the ground, accessible to disaster survivors that otherwise would not have access to those funds to rebuild. SBA also increased loan limits for personal property, such as clothing, furniture, automobiles, and appliances from $40,000 to $100,000. SBA also increased initial payment deferral from 5 months to 12 months. This means a borrower does not need to make a payment and no interest accrues until 1 year after disbursement. This allows disaster survivors to focus on what matters most, their own personal and financial recovery. We also proved that we can be swift, we can be agile, and with the authorities Congress has provided us, we can pivot to deliver on the most critical local priorities. Specifically in Maui, SBA increased the disbursement period from 6 months to 24 months. This means that businesses and homeowners have more time to rebuild, that their loan will not lapse, even if they can't start rebuilding today. What once was a lend and leave program is now a whole of SBA effort where we bring every resource to bear that we can to help communities rebuild. Government contracting is just one of those. SBA's Office of Government Contracting and Business Development identified 179 Hawaii-based small businesses owned by veterans, women, and Native Hawaiians. As of now, more than $688 million in federal contracts have been awarded to small businesses, including $425 million in prime contracts to Hawaii-owned firms. That translates to 57.5% going to small business and 37.8% going to Hawaii-based firms. And I will commend the Army Corps of Engineers that have been a critical partner in helping us reach those targets. And if we can do this in the island in the middle of the Pacific, we can translate this to other places in the continental United States. We've done more than that in the past year, but we have more work to do. This week, I'll be hearing directly from the residents and people of Maui to see what the work in the coming years looks like, because communities recover stronger when we strengthen how we work together. So mahalo for your support of SBA, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Administrator, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back his time, and thank you very much. I think we all see why sometimes 5 minutes doesn't fit perfectly, and you took good advantage to make sure that we received information we needed to know. Administrator Peterson, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. The gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Aloha, Chairman Sessions and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, thank you so much for inviting me here today. EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. We strive to provide clean water, clean air, and clean land to all communities. Under this mission, ensuring that that includes recovery and response to disasters, such as the terrible one that occurred in Maui in 2023. This remains a top priority for EPA and myself. On August 10th, President Biden signed the Major Disaster Declaration. Within 24 hours, EPA personnel were on the ground responding. Since this tragedy struck, I personally have been in Lahaina 4 times and have continued to bring staff here. Over 300 people have come from all across EPA. I have seen firsthand the devastation in Lahaina, heard firsthand the stories of the communities and residents here, as well as the community leaders. It has affected me profoundly, as has it for every EPA personnel member who has come here. These personal experiences will remain with us and continue to motivate us here. As part of the emergency response, FEMA has assigned EPA 3 missions: hazardous material removal, water infrastructure technical assistance, and sustainability advice during the recovery process. Today, I'm here to provide updates on what we have accomplished, as well as what we are continuing to work on today. On August 17th, 2023, only 7 days after the disaster declaration, EPA began removing hazardous material from the city of Lahaina. During this period, we removed 200 tons by hand of hazardous material from 1,374 properties, residential properties, and 74 commercial properties. We did so and completed this mission by December 22nd, which I want to highlight was done 30 days ahead of deadline and $20 million under budget. During this time, we also set up 5 air monitoring stations so that the County of Maui would be able to understand any air quality issues affecting their communities. We placed these air monitors in the most vulnerable sections of the community, to include our schools. Our next mission was to deploy our Water Emergencies Technical Assistance Team. They provide guidance and technical assistance to the County of Maui for stormwater, drinking water, and wastewater. Over the last 7 months, EPA has tested over 1,300 drinking water lateral lines that connect to main sewer lines. Of these, we identified 600 that contain contaminated water and contaminated substance, and we alerted Maui County so that they could be capped and protected from the rest of the water system. We also cleared and inspected over 98,000 linear feet of the sewer system so that it would be operable as soon as people would be able to rebuild. Through these efforts, EPA has enabled water advisories to be lifted sooner, for water treatment plants to become online, and to protect segments of the water infrastructure to prevent ash and debris from flowing into saltwater and fresh groundwater. On July 17th, on time and on budget, EPA completed our drinking water and wastewater emergency response. Currently, we are working to design for the Wahakuli Terrace neighborhood a connection to the sewer system. This will eliminate the need for cesspools that degrade the environment. The last mission EPA received was for sustainability. This is a long-term advisor to assist rebuilding communities and restoring watersheds with the aim of helping the communities be more resilient in the face of this kind of disaster. The Sustainability Advisor continues to collaborate with local and state departments, as well as our federal family at the table here, to understand local priorities and identify potential funding sources for long-term recovery. The most important aspect of what EPA did here was to approach this mission so that it was deeply rooted in respect for Hawaii's unique cultural heritage. Through consultation with Maui's community and cultural leaders, we cooperatively developed a cultural strategy that set a new standard for EPA for federal response. This included establishing cultural sensitivity training, as you heard, that continues today with the federal family. We placed cultural monitors at each of our hazmat teams, and we also embedded over 50% of our on-island staff were locals, and we're very proud of this. We also set a new code of conduct for all of our contractors and our personnel. My partner agencies continue this work so that we protect as much as possible the rich cultural heritage of Lahaina. Throughout the response, EPA was dedicated to communicating with the communities as clearly and frequently as possible. We appeared every week in the public meetings, and we appeared at multiple venues to include this disaster assistance, the formal disaster assistance session that we're continually open here in the Lahaina Center, as well as the more informal ones, such as the one that took place in Napili Park. We strive to keep the residents and the community informed on everything we do. We worked very closely with our local, state, and federal partners. I'm so grateful to be at this table with this wonderful and cooperative team that allowed us to get in and do our mission. EPA remains committed to long-term recovery. I have walked the streets of Lahaina and Kula and have spoken with community leaders and residents. Their stories of loss, resilience, and hope motivates both myself and the entire EPA to continue supporting Maui's recovery. The incredible strength and spirit of the Maui community inspires us, and their needs guide our work. Mahalo nui ola. I look forward to your questions.
Administrator, thank you very much. Following your words of perhaps the way you have operated, we will offer some bit of feedback now too, and I would move to the distinguished gentleman, Congressman Takuda, on our attempt to try and be more forthright too. The gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, while this hearing may be slightly different from others that have attended hearings here at the state legislature or the city council, and there is no formal period for public comment, we want to be able to share what you have to say and make sure that you are heard. And so for those who would like to, there are comment cards that are available that will be handed around by staff that you can please fill out, put your thoughts down, your contact information, and it will be put as part of the official record of this committee. So, Mr. Chair, committee members, I do appreciate this opportunity to allow our people to be able to participate and give comment today.
We're delighted. We had decided we were going to do that at the end. We decided we're going to do it in the middle. So, Administrator Peterson, thank you for your feedback. We now would move to the distinguished gentlewoman from California, my colleague, Ms. Porter.
Thank you very much. I want to start with you, Mr. Sanchez, and talk about the SBA's role here. About how many applications have you received from those affected by this disaster?
Completed applications is roughly 6,000.
6,000. Were there more that were started but not finished?
Yes, there were about 6,400 that were started.
And what have you done what have you done to locate those people who started an application but maybe didn't finish it, to try to understand why?
Sure. We have gone through our teams on the ground as we've researched the database, who started an application, maybe didn't finish it. We have done multiple attempts. For example, we reached out just earlier this year to about 309 of those. 308 of those we were able to identify. At the end of the day, we were able to make positive contact with about 240 of those, and we tried multiple times over 2 weeks, and we identified, why haven't you completed it? Sometimes the answer was no interest at this time. Sometimes they needed additional paperwork or guidance, and then our teams were able to follow up with them directly to help get them over the finish line.
I think that's really helpful because I think in the wake of an event like this, there's sort of lots of different people coming to help, and people aren't sure where they belong. And so I think that follow-up and that tracking is really one of the most important things government can do. I think often we focus on what gets dispersed, what gets done, and I think one of the important things we asked ourselves, we actually have to study who doesn't apply, who doesn't know about the program, who doesn't complete it, to kind of understand whether we're being effective. I also wanted to ask you about sort of the role of the SBA writ large, because I think this is one of the agencies that maybe has a little bit of a public relations problem in that you also assist individuals. Can you talk about that? Because I think what is a business under the SBA is complex, and I think often makes it challenging for people to know whether they can and should be asking you for assistance.
Sure. Many people don't know that SBA helps homeowners, renters, and businesses and private nonprofits help to recover after disaster. And we are here to help with your uninsured losses or underinsured losses. And for perspective, local and state governments typically do more business with SBA than almost any other federal agency. Certainly, FEMA comes in for the presidentially declared disasters. For perspective, we were on the ground for 472 disasters last year. Since 2000, there have only been 3 years where there have been more presidential disasters than SBA declared disasters. And so while we're on the ground more often, we do need the help of local communities, nonprofits, and local leaders to explain to people you can come to SBA and the value of a long-term, low-interest, long-term loan.
So I wanted to go back to those 6,000 applications that were received. How many has SBA accepted so far?
Of those, we received about 6,028 applications fully completed. We have approved 2,278 of those loans. The vast majority of those, about 1,434, are for homes, 356 for businesses, and 488 for economic injury disaster loans. That is businesses that were not physically impacted but are seeing a downturn in revenue. And some of those businesses may have been both physically and economically injured. Mm-hmm.
So what about the other 3,740 and change? Are you still reviewing them? What is their status? What is the timeline? Have they been denied? What can you tell us about that?
Sure. One of the concerns is a protracted recovery. We will be here for a while. Mm-hmm. And so we continue to reach out. There are folks that I continue to reach out personally. This is my third time on the island to help get through the process and see where they are. We will be here for the long haul. People are recovering at their own pace. We're learning the different culture of the island, the pace at which people come. We have, and so that's we're leading from the ground up is critical to us. In terms of how long we'll be here, we've gotten a 2-year. People can draw down 2 years from being accepted a loan. We recently signed a lease for 2 years with extension to extend. We know this is going to be a long recovery, so we have 10 staff on the ground. 5 of those are local hires. And so we're committed to be here however long it takes for us to get people across the finish line.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point that the work that you've done in terms of increasing the disbursement period, I think sometimes we focus on, every dollar has to go out right away. And I think what that misses is that sometimes not everyone wants their dollars right away, because once you take the money, then the time starts ticking for the repayment and the rebuilding. And we are now, as we've heard from the EPA and from the engineers and from FEMA, we are now in a place 1 year later where water has been restored, power has been restored, debris has been removed, and we can start actually that rebuilding process. So I just want to emphasize to the public, I think sometimes there's a sense of every dollar hasn't gone out, it's been a year. I think your point about centering when people are ready for that help and being here in the long term is really important. So I want to suggest to you that lengthened dispersal process and that lengthened repayment period is something that I think, particularly for fire, we might need to adopt more agency-wide. I do think there are unique things about Lahaina, but I think fire generally, a little bit different than flood, for example, but even flood, I think we're just experiencing bigger disasters, and that means it takes a longer time to do the cleanup and repair, and we're doing it in a more both culturally sensitive way but environmentally safe way, and what that means is we can't always disperse the money as quickly, and so I would encourage you to think about that. I actually have more questions, but my time has expired, and I hope we have a chance to come back around, Mr. Chair, if we can.
Thank you very much. The gentlewoman yields back her time. The answer to that is, yes, we will do that. You had previously directed that comment to me, and I wanted to be as realistic as I could. We don't have 40 members here. We have members who are here.
You should be thankful we don't have 40 members.
Well, I agree with that also. We'd now move to the distinguished gentleman, Ms. Dakota, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I just want to follow up on Representative Porter's comments. But first say, Mr. Sanchez, I remember in just the days after the fire, Administrator Guzman coming to the War Memorial with us to see a congregate shelter, helping us to actually translate in Spanish because we didn't have a translator right there at the time, and allowing my team to then help this person, get their papers that had burned in the fire. And so just really appreciative that it was boots on the ground for anything that was required of us. So please relay my thanks to the administrator. But I did want to follow up, and you and I kind of started the conversation earlier today. As we know, small businesses, I almost call them micro businesses, mom and pop shops here, they're the core of Hawaii's economy, and definitely the case in Lahaina. And that's particularly true of this area. And so many of our small businesses, quite frankly, as we discussed, were still recovering from the pandemic. They were still trying to pay off their existing idle loans from the SBA. The fires hit, and all of a sudden, while you've got deferment, the thought of taking on another obligation is quite daunting for many, from a credit perspective, from a responsibility perspective. And as a result, they had significant challenges many times securing further assistance from the SBA, as Representative Porter alluded to. Mr. Sanchez, in the most recent numbers that we've been looking at, more than half of all home and business applications were denied or withdrawn. Withdrawn oftentimes meaning they couldn't get documentation or answers required to actually complete it. And in the case of idle loans, about 2/3 of all applications were denied or withdrawn. And it is a timing thing. But as we discussed earlier, how are we going to work to get those thousands of applications that came through? How do we get them to yes? Because many of these individuals need those resources to either rebuild, to be able to stay here in the place that they love. And so how are we getting to yes?
Yes, so we're very deeply committed to try to get people across the finish line and to yes. It's something that we learned in Florida, we learned it in Kentucky, we learned it in Selma, Alabama, and so we launched our reconsideration campaign. That means if you get a no from SBA, we're going to go back and figure out why the answer was no. One of the things that we've done through our reconsideration campaign, typically if our credit score is a certain number, minimum credit score. If you're within 5 points of that, there's a decent chance we can get you back to yes by working with you through SBA district offices and our resource partners. We expanded that here to 10, within 10 points. And so let me tell you what that actually means. It means because we go back and help get people to yes and to devote the time, energy, and the resources that is required for that. In Selma, a decline went from no to $400,000 in capital because we went back and tried to get folks to yes. I worked personally with one survivor here and who was having challenges with the paperwork and other issues, was frustrated. We got that disaster survivor from wanting to walk away to $574,000 in approved capital for them to start rebuilding their home and their business. And so that's the kind of approach that we're taking. And so we're bringing in our resource partners like Operation Hope, our small business development centers, and really that team effort and that going from just a Lend and Leave program that we used to be and that whole of SBA approach to bringing every resource we can to bear to help people through that application process. And not only that, try to get them other resources that they need.
Thank you. And as we discussed earlier, hopefully consideration can be made. Many of the things that disqualified people or forced them to withdraw, whether documentations, credit scores, financing, it was because of the fires. And so they need extra help to get them to that yes point where they'll be eligible. So I'm sure we'll have more discussion on that. But Mr. Fenton, would love to chat with you. I've been, first of all, Chair, I will have you know, a few days when I first met him, I asked him, where'd you have breakfast this morning? And he said, Tasty Crust. I knew we were in good hands because he was eating with the locals from day one. So thank you, Mr. Fenton, for being here for nonstop for the past year. And, you kind of talked a little bit about it in your verbal and your written testimony about the biggest challenge of the past year being housing, the thousands of displaced individuals and households living in already tight market. Majority were renters, many living on top of each other in many particular situations, and how it was a joint decision between FEMA, the governor, and the mayor to kind of target the short-term vacation rentals so that we can quickly put survivors into these homes. And in testimony, Mayor Bisson talks about how, the unintended consequences were the negative impacts on the housing market island-wide and for many residents that have been displaced. And there have been multiple accounts of predatory behavior as some landlords have scrambled to secure the higher, rents paid by FEMA's direct lease program and the state's equivalent program and displace current residents right now. And so, Mr. Fenton, given what you know now, would this still have been the best approach for transitioning survivors out of non-congregate shelters into this direct lease program?
Yeah, I think at the speed that we had to do it, this was the only resource that had those many units available. We have had since we've primarily focused on the vacation rental market, we try to limit the impact to individuals here that were significantly impacted by this event. Over 4,000 units lost in a significant event. So we tried to limit that. We have less than 10 that have been brought to us as potential issues where people have been displaced. We've turned those all over to the state's Attorney General to take action against that. But I don't know if there would have been any quicker solution just because of the limitation of infrastructure, water, and other issues to develop sites. It's taken us right now, I think the site that we're doing, somewhere around 9 months to do that. We assessed over 20 different properties and really had limited solutions to do that. Most of the people want to stay on the west side, and so there's just not a lot of good solutions. I think the vacation rental, using vacation rentals, it was the best solution and the most timely solution. I think in retrospect, we should go back and look at that and figure out how to really utilize that in combination with local authorities and regulations, and how can we more manage that better in the future if we had to do something similar. We may also want to look at maybe a quicker housing solution. Right now our housing solution is really what we use in the mainland that we're exporting out here, which takes a long time. So can we use something that is more austere, that uses maybe solar or other things that don't require as much infrastructure as we do right now? So there's things that we could do to look at how we're setting up our infrastructure here and not have as a robust a system that we have on the mainland, and something that works better maybe with some of the conditions as we go into the Pacific, especially the far western Pacific.
Absolutely, thank you. And I know I have more questions, but thank you. I definitely think a hot wash after all of this is done to take a look at how we can come up with better alternatives and approaches, whether in Hawaii or anywhere in the continental United States, would be a good one. And also understanding the human capacity, in terms of regulation that exists here and ability to be able to manage what ultimately became predatory behavior, whether reported or not. What we do know is there has been displacement, and that's unacceptable across the board. And so thank you for that, and we look forward to more discussion throughout the hearing. But, Mr. Chair, we'll yield back. And
Gentlewoman yields back her time. I'd now move to the distinguished gentleman, my dear friend, Congressman Case, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fenton, we've all made reference, not all of us, but certainly the two of us have made reference to immediate needs funding restrictions now placed by FEMA on funding of disasters due to the shortfall in the Disaster Relief Fund. And you testified that meant you would not be able to essentially obligate long-term funding recovery efforts and needed to move to immediate disaster-related stuff. And we obviously have a lot of disasters around the country. So what is the practical impact if we don't solve the DRF soon? What is going to be the practical impact to the Maui recovery from the restriction of immediate needs funding?
It delays long-term recovery. It delays rebuilding of infrastructure. We're unable to obligate the funding that's needed to rebuild permanent infrastructure. And so while we currently right now have sufficient funds to continue to help individuals with housing or other immediate needs, that too is starting to be threatened. So the impact is really to, we're at a very good stage right now with debris being removed, water coming on, and power coming on, to actually start rebuilding the infrastructure, and that will delay that process and elongate the recovery and impact Maui further.
Okay, thank you. And then switching to the subject of housing, because I think we would agree that this has been probably the most problematic part of the recovery is taking kind of FEMA's more continent-based approach to transitional housing and long-term recovery housing and trying to transpose that into a much different housing environment. Ms. Porter made reference to this. And we have had many discussions along these lines, and you with the congressional delegation, and this is an area that we have on occasion disagreed on what the right path is. I think we're on a good path now, but I just want to make sure of some basic facts. If I understand correctly, and this comes from my staff's conversation with you of a few weeks ago, somewhere in the range of 4,300 households were eligible for transitional housing. The information that I think I got back from you through them was that somewhere in the range of 1,300 had actually requested assistance, and that 1,300 is distributed in various ways, a direct lease program. Some of them found permanent solutions. The Kilohana Group site was referenced, and some of your smaller transitional housing that you are actually constructing. I guess, first of all, are the facts correct? And second, if those are correct, what did happen to the other 2,000 some odd? It seems a large number to me, looking at it today.
Yeah, so over 4,000 qualified what we call direct housing. That means they're a renter or owner and their home was destroyed by the fire. And then what happens is we conduct a pre-placement interview with each one of those 4,000 households. So these are households, not individuals' households. We conduct interviews with each one of them to understand what their needs are. A large number were able to secure housing. Some are insured and have ALE or LOU and use that insurance. Some were able to find other housing. And so those discussions, and sometimes as many as 10 discussions with an individual household, led us to 1,300 need some type of direct housing, meaning that we have no housing, we need help from the federal government to house us. The average in my region, Pacific or mainland, is usually less than 10%. So right now we're at about 32%, which is a higher than normal number, but I think well within the norm of what we see on other disasters.
Okay, so do you have any expectation? Is that number then pretty firm? Is that the universe we're dealing with? I guess the question I'm asking is it possible that some of the people who did not go into the transitional housing program would in fact still go into it in some way, shape, or form if the option was there? Or are they pretty much off your radar at this point, from this perspective at least?
There's been very few that have come back up that had a situation that's changed it. I would want to say in the single digits over the last couple of months. There are some right now whose ALE or LOUs being exhausted, and then what they're going into is our continuing housing assistance, where we provide them 175% of rental costs and help them continue to rent units there. Okay,
great. I also have a few more questions, but I will defer, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much, Ed. I will now yield myself 5 minutes for the purpose of questioning. Administrator Sanchez, I'm going to aim the first question at you, and then I have a second question that I would encourage any of you to respond to. You and I both know that these are 4 agencies that are represented here. That does not represent the entire United States government. There are certainly issues related to the IRS and other reporting, perhaps those who have student loans and other things that would need that output. Do you believe that they've been adequately addressed as you look across this entire process, that you had help from other agencies and answered those questions?
Yes, sir. I think one of the things that we've learned from disaster to disaster is that if you're one of the most impacted disaster survivors, you probably won't file in the first 30, 60, 90 days. You come in later and you're missing paperwork, you need questions. One of the things that we have built a strong partnership, for example, with the Internal Revenue Service. If we can't find, if that disaster survivor can't find tax records, we will go out and do that for them on behalf of the IRS. For example, and we know that 59 of those IRS didn't have records because we went and looked. In addition, beyond that, we're also working with our resource partners beyond the federal government because it has to be a state, local, and federal and nonprofit response. We're working with nonprofits to get that paperwork and other issues they need to get businesses across the finish line.
Did you run across anyone that was seeking assistance for a business or something where there were no IRS records that were available from the IRS?
59 of those, yes, sir.
59. Did you extend to them the advantages of the federal government, even though they had perhaps not taken the time to file paperwork about what they had been doing previously? How did you handle that?
We connect them to other resources because we're a lending program, not a grant program. There's certain requirements.
It might be the IRS. So we will be asking the IRS about how they handled that. I think it's important for the members of Congress to know that if someone chose not to legitimately register their business, to pay their taxes and do those things, I, as one member, would want to question what would that response be so that I would be aware. Thank you very much. The overwhelming thing that has struck me today is that the flexibility that you were given, each of you, and I applaud that, and I think that's important. But it is, I think, important for people to understand what the rules of the game are, how long they have, how flexible you have become in that process. Do you believe that you have adequately made sure that perhaps our young mayor, perhaps other people, perhaps yes, Mayor, I did call you young. He smiled at his wife. He smiled at his wife, and she assured him back, yes, honey, you're a young mayor. But have these become known across what I would say the needs of the island to where it may not get to everybody, but to where everybody goes, yes, we knew the rules, as opposed to, I didn't really ever understand what we were trying to get at. Do you think that you have adequately brought these rules, regulations, timeframes, responses, answers to a broad group of people? Administrator Fenton, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, sir. I think it's a continuing process. What I found on Pacific Islands, and I've had a number of discussions with the young mayor a number of times during this event, but it's a continuing education. It's not a straight line. It's a Venn diagram, and it can take continued effort, and it's just not, myself communicating it, it's others communicating it, it's the community communicating it. I think the mayor's advisory program is critical to bring senior leaders from the community in. How do we educate them so they carry the message? Maybe using faith-based leaders, maybe using other individuals. It's a continuing effort.
You think you say the same thing every time of what the rules are to every single group?
Yeah, I think that sometimes, when you have an organization as big as ours, not everyone is on the same message sometimes, and we have to continue to improve that. I think that sometimes, federal government programs could be over bureaucratic, and the more that we
yes, sir, but we're talking about the rules.
Yeah.
We're talking about the flexibility that Administrator Sanchez so adequately explained as the flexibility. Here are the rules. And that's where I think it's important to recognize how you had some people who may not have qualified, and we need to make sure those rules are there. So you would say it's an ongoing process, something that you need to remember is very important, and sharing that information. Administrator Sanchez? Thank you.
So certainly a great question, Chairman, because our parameters for doing disaster lending those are set. What we
Yeah,
can't
but they changed.
It's just the rules not to qualify change, the rules in which you can access the loans.
I do agree.
And so one of the things, it's kind of a victim of sort of our innovation. We want to lead from the ground up and meet local priorities. So some of the parameters did change to be responsive to the local needs, like we're doing this
And
across the country.
have they been well communicated?
We're doing that daily, but again, on this visit, we've heard the need for more flexibilities, and so it is a challenge to be innovative, but also go back. And we've tried to, with 10,000 emails to homeowners, 4,000 emails to businesses, 6,400 actual physical contacts with disaster survivors to let them know what those changes are. I think we can be nimble, but I think we can also do a better job of making sure that the person that got a loan on day 10 understands the flexibilities that are now there 3 months later when someone may have gotten their loan as well. So it's a work in
I think
progress.
saying things also, and we'll completely defer to you, but to say to people, we are now halfway through this period. If you fit or believed you were going to be doing this, things like that, reminding people, if I were involved in something that was highly difficult in my life, I would want a little bit of a reminder. Not today, you got till tomorrow, but rather today you've got 6 months as a reminder. Thank you very much. I think these are the two questions that I have. I now would like to advise the panel that we're going to go through a second round in the same order. Distinguished gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Fenton, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of your housing recommendations, following up a little bit on what my colleague, Representative Case, said. It's notable to me, as I prepared for this hearing and heard over and over again, that housing remains the biggest unsolved challenge. We've made great progress in many other areas, that HUD, Housing and Urban Development, is not here today. And I think this reflects nothing about the preparation, but something more structural in our federal government about the role of HUD and how that agency works. HUD, again, Housing and Urban Development. Can you talk about how we might better integrate HUD into disaster relief? What are the barriers structurally, funding-wise? How can we do better going forward on that piece?
Yeah, so HUD has been here as part of our team, the interagency team that's been here since the beginning. But there's a number of limitations, both on my side and HUD's side. My side is primarily focused at temporary housing to be an interim solution that is usually set at 18 months. Now, I can extend that, and in this event, I'll extend that temporary housing. But when we start talking about permanent housing, there's some things I could do. On publicly owned infrastructure, if HUD doesn't have the funding, I could step in and fund it, and I've done that here for some of the publicly damaged ones. But probably the biggest tool that we have is HUD's CDBGR program, and it's not an annual appropriation, but usually done through supplementals. And so what's happening is you have this interim authority that comes in through FEMA to temporarily meet the immediate needs, the mass care needs, put people in non-congregate sheltering, temporary house people, without that authority working simultaneously to work on the long-term solutions. And so what's happening is, and that one takes the longest to actually implement. So if you don't work it as we're working the other ones, you get to a point where I've now got to my 18 months and there's nothing there, right?
Yeah.
Because this one takes the longest to develop permanent infrastructure. We were actually doing a pretty good job of phasing everything in here by having the debris removed within a year for residential, the water systems back operational because of EPA's work and the Corps' work and all the sewer systems. So we're ready for the infrastructure. We're ready for the community to build. What's lacking is that federal funding to help the rebuilding. SBA's is there within the loan part, but HUD needs to be there, and it's really because it's a supplemental funding through the CDBGR that doesn't exist, and it's a tool that the mayor doesn't have to use.
Yeah, and I think that really illustrates that there's a focus on kind of the day one, the money for the day one, but we have to start planning and funding for the long term on day one. And so instead there's a focus on getting it out quickly and not on sort of the longer term. And by the time we go to do that, then it creates that gap. Right, that gap where people fall into between what you can do and the HUD piece. I also wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you mentioned the permanent housing construction program. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
But is it true that you can't do that outside the continental United States?
No, I could do it outside the continental United States. So it's based on, initially, maybe about 10, 20 years ago, it was only for insular areas. But that has changed now, and it's we're able to do it anywhere where there's a need and it's cost effective. There's certain conditions that need to be met as far as there has to be no alternate housing resources available. There has to be also other forms of, no forms of other temporary housing that are unavailable or are infeasible or not cost effective.
So can I ask you, I mean, from a taxpayer perspective, realizing that reportedly, and please correct me if this is wrong, in some instances, the government was paying upwards of $1,000 per night for short-term housing, which is, I think, pretty eye-popping for taxpayers around the country. Why not deploy the permanent housing construction program? In other words, given the housing shortage we have already in so many communities, when there's a disaster, does it make sense to have FEMA focus so much on temporary instead of on a better balance between temporary and permanent?
Well, there still needs to be a temporary solution, because what do you do with individuals, the length of time that it takes you to rebuild? And we know in fires, it's probably going to take you a year before the infrastructure and the housing's ready to rebuild because of the removal and restoration of infrastructure, even longer than hurricanes, floods, or other events. And so what do you do to house people? So you need to have that temporary solution, but also need to be able to work the permanent solution.
Yeah. I just wonder about more austere temporary with a bigger commitment to permanent right at the get-go. Does that make sense? Rather than what we've kind of been doing, which is pretty long temporary, and then relying on that gap to close the permanent. I want to turn quickly to Ms. Peterson. Can you talk about the role of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the grants that have gone out with regard to electrical grid improvement and water infrastructure for Hawaii and Maui in particular?
Sure. So the funds that we use to inspect and both the drinking water and sewer water, those were all through FEMA. It wasn't through the IRA process. We haven't done anything in particular in the electrical grid. Certainly when they're a little farther in rebuilding, because the Solar for All program goes through 2025 and 2026, this community would be eligible to apply as an underserved community for solar for different parts of their community. But at the stage of the rebuilding, there's not, to my knowledge, we don't have any applications, but I can have our staff get back to you more further because I'm not quite sure. Because
my understanding is that Hawaii generally, and maybe Mr. Case knows more about this, but that Hawaii generally received like $95 million for electrical grid, and I just don't know how much of that is then being allocated out. You know, this is always a challenge. I think in any community, it's a bigger challenge in island communities that are non-contiguous. But I think that there was $95 million allocated for electrical grid improvements and $50 million for water infrastructure improvements through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I think EPA, before your time, to be fair, and gave out those grants. So I think one of the questions I have for the second panel that I'm going to stop talking so we can get to is how much of that is coming to Maui and whether or not we're leveraging that effectively to prevent the next disaster. So with that, I'll stop and again thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Does gentlewoman seek time?
Yes, I do.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to elaborate a little bit on the line of questioning there. Mr. Fenton, let's talk about the Permanent Housing Construction Authority. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm reading your testimony. So at that point, when you could have triggered the Permanent Housing Construction Authority, was the collective decision of the mayor and the governor and talking with FEMA to instead pursue the route of the direct lease? Or tell me what has to happen just so we can have a forward-looking view of how do you get us to that permanent housing construction versus the more temporary transitional kinds of housing that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, so permanent housing for us is underneath, our authorities are underneath the Staff Act 408, C4, I believe is where it's at. And I think the limitations there are, one, it has to be a homeowner as we look at it, and we have done it on some other Pacific islands. It has to be uninsured. So you're talking now about a population that fits that's probably underneath 100 on this. 90% of the people displaced were renters here. So it's not, a silver bullet, if you will, to meet a large need. Next, it has to be, there has to be no other solutions for temporary housing, and it has to be cost effective. And so there are a number of other solutions here. There's direct lease. We could put in a temporary unit. There's a lot of other solutions before you get to housing. Just to give you an idea, to build on, last time we built was probably about 10 years ago out here in the Pacific, maybe about 10 years ago, and it was about $400,000 on per unit to build. The cost out here to build is over $900 a square feet right now. You're talking over $1 million something per house to rebuild out here, which would not make it feasible based on the authorities that I have right now to do that. Our authority really focuses on, temporary solutions, and I've used the ones that provide the most solutions, the quickest, understanding that this will be a need that probably goes on 6 years here.
You're basically the houser of last resort.
Yes.
If you will. And so probably congressionally, we would have to take a look at whether or not those authorities could be broadened a bit to take into account these kind of different situations where we may not want to look at it just being for the uninsured or for, a homeowner, but particularly I think in this case where there's not many other options. And I think when you look at our housing market, not many options is particularly the box that we check off quite well here. And so just maybe if we could talk a little bit more about the permanent, more of the building units, the Kilohana Project, 169. As you know, for our congressional delegation, and we've said this multiple times, we would love to actually see us get to 1,000 temporary units built here, partly because we know that while the direct lease program is great, there is always, for example, the possibility that after 18 months in the program, a landlord might decide to opt out. And so we need a place where we know we'll have to house individuals for upwards of 5 to 6 years. And something that we have built and have Kuleana over is a lot easier than then trying to find another lease for these particular families. So, what's the plans and potential to, as you know, it takes a while to build, to continue to build beyond the 169 units that will be completed in October, I believe, or by October, so we can get a little bit higher in that numbers and provide some stability in terms of housing going forward in the future?
Yes, we're balancing the build versus the resiliency needed. We also don't want to build something that becomes the next risk as we build it. We're building the 169 units. We are also working with the primary homeowners property to put units on their property and working with them right now. The next thing we really want to pursue is, rather than building group sites, we are actually reaching out to the secondary homeowners, which over 70% of the homes up there are secondary homes. People that own them are not from this island. Most of them are from the mainland. We want to see what they're going to do with those lots. Maybe we could rent those lots from them rather than give them to the developer, and we can start putting units on those lots to bring back the community. So that's a program we're talking to the mayor about. We're about to start doing a massive call out. There's over 1,100 households, properties that meet that those conditions. The other thing that we've done is we've actually, in the past, and I think we do need to come up with better solutions for the Pacific because it is so unique. We've done a program with MIT to look at a seed program where we put something temporary out that becomes then the permanent piece of the permanent house. And so we've worked with MIT and come up with a prototype where maybe it's the kitchen, the bathroom, a room, and maybe the main room. And then from there, you could build onto that to make it the permanent solution. Technology is now catching up with this, and whether it's 3D printing or different solutions, that we could start looking at those now, which is agile and could be shipped, because everything out here, as you know, has to be shipped by sea, that can meet those kind of things. So I think we're in an area now where we need to start doing that research and unique capabilities for the Pacific, as we have done to kind of speed up the mainland.
No, definitely. I think the more we can build in some permanence, understanding that this is a long haul for many of our residents, and we want to give them as much stability as possible, the better. Chair, if I may just ask one quick question, you can answer yes or no. You and I have talked about this, and it was brought up about HUD's interaction. Is there anything Congress can do, for example, where we can start to integrate FEMA and HUD's involvement in the sense that, for example, if FEMA could purchase real property to house temporarily victims and survivors, and at that point that they no longer need it, turn it over to HUD for more permanent housing solutions for the population that they particularly serves, it would be an investment of money from the federal government that would be much better than a one-and-done kind of direct lease program. It would increase inventory of affordable units in a community. We definitely need it here. And so what needs to be done to, again, as Representative Porter talked about, we need them parallel. I'd like to see them overlapped so that we can have the best use of our dollars and, quite frankly, at the end of the day, increase inventory in our communities that ultimately, everywhere you look across the country, affordable housing is something that we all need to see in our backyards.
I agree with you that we need to integrate those authorities better. There's no one solution that fits every unique jurisdiction's needs, and we need to have some flexibility and authority that allows us to connect those authorities better, including funding the CGBGR right away.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Woman yields back her time. I'll go to my second round. Colonel, you're now faced with a second year. What lies ahead for you and the Corps?
So thank you for the question. 1 year under our belt, we have just removed all the debris from residential lots in Lahaina Town and in Kula, and we have about 112 lots or so left that we have to just finish the paperwork on and get them turned back over to the county so that those residents can rebuild. We're about 60% complete with commercial debris removal. That has been a bit more, it started a little later, and it's been a complex mission, one that we don't do frequently on all these disasters. So we're going to spend time working on that. And then as Mr. Fenton mentioned, we're continuing to support FEMA's initiatives to help with housing, whether that's through a lease that FEMA leases it, and we put a ATTHU, essentially a containerized housing unit on top of it. We're also going to finish building out our Kilohana site to get those 169 units ready for residents, for fire survivors to move into.
Good. Administrator Peterson, you too, I would really ask the same question. Your valuable insight has been very useful. Do you need to be there for recovery? Tell me what your next year, this second year, looks like for the EPA.
Sure. Thank you for that question. We are in the process of hiring 2 staff to be out here permanently so that we can continue to assist in the water and sustainability missions, because those are really where we see EPA being able to help resources and link that to the needs that we see as they arise. I met with the mayor yesterday to look at are there other Wakuli Terrace type neighborhoods out there that might need additional assistance that we are just not aware of yet? So that's where we see our future.
Right, thank you very much. I would yield now to the distinguished gentleman, my friend Ed Case, for his follow-up. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fenton, this is more of a comment than a question, but I just want to make sure that everybody heard your general comments on the phasing of assistance as you go through on a long-term basis, because I will tell you that in the many briefings that I've been in with you and the collective federal, state, and local team, what has been most impressive is where you line things up in just a chart and you just go right across over a long-term lay where you know what's happening here, what has to happen, and when the next tranche of federal funding needs to be ready. And I'm completely agreeing with you again on the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief, which is the next big tranche out there. So I just want to commend you for that, and I think it's something that if I assume you're doing this throughout the country every time you have a disaster, but I think that was done well. I think that a question for either Ms. Peterson or Colonel Swenson, just going back to debris removal, your testimony was that I think your testimony was that there's 98% removal now of the residential. Is that 98% residential lots that have authorized you for removal, or is that the universe of all residential lots?
Thank you for that question. So we cleared this week our 1,390th residential lot. Now, a residential lot it's not like zoning. So it's not, if it's zoned commercial, it's commercial debris. If it's zoned residential, it's residential. We categorize residential and commercial debris removal based on the type of debris. So a 180-unit apartment complex that had beds and linens and sheets and personal effects would be considered residential debris. So when I say 1,390 units, that could be one single-family home, it could be one single-family home with an Ohana home, or it could be 180 units.
Here's the reason for my question, because if you go back 6 to 8 months when the residential debris removal program was first instituted, we were getting a 10% or so response in terms of authorization at the very, very beginning from homeowners. And either they didn't know that the program was there, or they didn't trust it, or as I recall, there was a liability release provision that scared some homeowners. And so what I'm asking is the universe of people eligible for the program, is that everybody, so that you actually surmounted that obstacle with the very commendable tailored local approach, or do we still have a lot of homeowners out there that just haven't opted into debris removal at all, and if so, why?
So I think you can count everyone who's opted out on one hand or less. Okay. We have gotten almost every single commercial and residential property owner to opt into our program, and we did it because we demonstrated success, because we worked with the elders in the community who have who are the respected members who share their knowledge with the rest of the community. We did it because we hired local labor who went out and showed residents that we are not here. This is not the federal government here to somehow take your land. This is people that are from the community doing this clearance for you, and then we give it back. We
Okay, well
relinquish that
then
right
double
of entry.
commendations, because it wasn't looking so good 6 to 8 months ago, and so you found and I think that's probably a positive lesson learned from this experience that can be applied somewhere else in the country. A final comment, Chair, and this is an area that the subcommittee may want to follow up on, but we've talked about administrative flexibility with all 4 of our testifiers here. And adjusting through administrative flexibility to the actual needs of the local community, I think, has been really positive in all of your situations. But there's a limit to administrative flexibility. Essentially, sooner or later, you run out of flexibility, and the law itself prevents you from going any further. And my question would be, not for here, but for later on, in a more deliberate way, is, okay, how do we change the law? Well, like, what were the limitations that really you just wish, if you were having a full disaster response here, that you had the obstacles presented by the law where we can actually amend them? I think one example, which we haven't talked about, was the ineligibility of compact free association residents for key federal programs, which we solved, but that was a limitation in the law. We couldn't do anything about it. The Red Cross came in and picked up that burden. That was a great cost share. I mean, not cost share, but responsibility sharing, so commending you for that. But I think this is an important thing to ask is, where can the laws be changed to accommodate some of the challenges that we saw? With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. I want to thank our first panel. I believe you have provided substance that not only enumerated your value add from you and your organizations, but you, to the highest of ability, presented yourself to where the people of this beautiful island felt like that you came, did the right thing, and offered an opportunity that really we as Americans would like and provided. And I want to thank each of you for that. Before offering adjournment to you, for the people who were earlier advised that we would take their comments, I'd like to ask that any sheets of paper, if anybody has a comment, would be placed upon that table at the end of the table, and we will gather those. And I really express my thanks to each of you. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the committee in recess for 10 minutes, subject to the call of the chair, where we will make the changes necessary to not only excuse the first panel that is now excused, but to call up the second panel. And the committee now stands in recess for 10 minutes. Committee will come to order. I want to thank each of our witnesses who are here and prepared to give testimony. I'd also like to thank those of you who are gathered together to hear this as the audience. And I want to commend you and let each of you know, in case you're just now walking in, that there are sheets of paper that are provided for you to provide us feedback also, and that we would appreciate and respect your feedback on those sheets of paper. We will have JD, where are you? My adult. Where is he? Okay, sheets of paper. All right, JD's not here. He was there a minute ago. The sheets of paper are where? On this blue table. If anyone would wish for us to receive your feedback, that is what we're here to do also. I'm now pleased to introduce our second panel, including the young mayor. They represent state and local witnesses who have been an equal part of not only serving the people of this island, but really the people of the United States of America. My comments earlier I would wish to make now, and that is, Mr. Mayor, you lived through this. We watched it, but you lived through it. And the people of this island suffered, and it was personal, and it was a different experience for them. But the people of the United States also watched how the people of this island handled this and the devastation that took place. And we offered not only our prayers, but also those of resiliency and braveness that were met by each of you. And so if you've just walked into this, please know that we've tried to respectfully approach this issue with my colleagues who are, one who is from California and two are from the islands here. And that we believe what we want to do is express to you that we have come to hear from the witnesses that we have had. First, the federal witnesses, and now the state witnesses. And we believe these witnesses represent the resiliency of this island, not just the hopes and dreams, not just the culture, but the future. And so I would like to express on behalf of my colleagues of the United States Congress, as well as those colleagues that I have that serve on government reform and oversight. My name is Pete Sessions, and I serve as chairman of the Government Operations and Federal Workforce, which is a subcommittee that is authorized literally within and by the Constitution of the United States. We don't come and tell people how to do, government agencies, how to run their business. We expect that the law and those parameters do that, but we do follow up. And we receive oversight instructions, and we follow up because we care about things that the government becomes engaged in. Lastly, we made a decision some 6 or 8 months ago that we would delay coming to the island with the knowledge that 6 months ago, much of the work was still underway, that the work would not be put on aside for us to come and do this, but rather it would continue. So, Mr. Mayor, as I told you, and I think that you agreed, we're not late. We think we're on time, and I think you agreed with that. But today is that day, and today is that day where community leaders will be able to express their feedback of what lies ahead and what needs to be done. So I would open up for, do you wish to make an opening statement? Gentlemen, recognize, or Ed, if you do. Katie's not here, so we'll come to you.
No, Mr. Chair, but just to thank, you have here leaders of our community that represent literally thousands of other individuals throughout Lahaina, Maui, and our state that absolutely stepped up, many of them survivors themselves, but have done so much to support our community. And so I'm very humbled and honored and grateful to be a part of this community as the representative, but really very blessed that we have these leaders here today. So thank you again for being here and bringing this hearing to Lahaina, where it really should always be, the discussion right here, coming to the people. So mahalo.
Thank you. My colleague from the committee, the distinguished gentlewoman from California, do you choose to make an opening statement?
I do not.
Do not. Mr. Case, do you choose to say anything?
Ms. Takuda spoke for me, so there you go.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we're delighted. We're going to proceed then. I'm pleased to introduce our witnesses, Major General Kenneth Hara. His duties as Adjutant General for the state of Hawaii began on December 6, 2019. General, thank you for being here. We appreciate this. Our young mayor, Richard Bessin, the mayor of the city of Maui since January 2023. Mr. Mayor, thank you for not just your friendship, but for your resiliency to be able to accept us coming here to ask questions and to hear from you and for what lies ahead. Thank you, sir. We next have Lauren Naame. And when I say it wrong, you're entitled to correct me because I speak Texan. Senior Vice President of the Hawaii Community Foundation's Maui Recovery Effort. Thank you for being here, and I apologize for accusing you of being the mayor's wife. His wife made sure she said to the mayor, tell that Texan to get it right. So, Lauren, thank you very much. Next we have Sain Patel, Board President of the Lahaina Town Action Committee, and we appreciate you being here, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Patel. And lastly, we have Mr. Kiamoyu Kapu, and I'll let you now pronounce your name properly, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Serves as President and CEO of the local organizations is focused on the importance of not just heritage, but the culture that comes with it. And I want to thank our panel very much. We're now going to have you rise, and each of you would raise your hand, your right hand, and wish this is for you to be sworn. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, we are now going to ask you, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please, thank you very much. Please let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may now take your seat. Those of you who got here early recognize what we're going to do here. We're going to move through what might be a 5-minute opportunity for you to provide this committee with your feedback, your testimony that while we have read, it's important for you to give. I will also tell you, Mr. Patel, perhaps most important to you, you do not have to stick within the 5 minutes, but I would ask that you make your points and then conclude your remarks with the knowledge that we will come back and ask those questions. We will now move directly to our first witness. General, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Sessions, Ranking Member Porter, members of the Hawaii delegation, good afternoon and aloha. I am Major General Kenneth Hara, the Adjutant General for the State of Hawaii Department of Defense, and also the overall State Incident Commander for the Maui wildfire response. In the aftermath of the August 8 Maui wildfires, federal, state, county, and private and local organizations rapidly mobilized and responded to providing life-saving, life-sustaining, and remains recovery operations. These entities work together to quickly provide sheltering solutions to the survivors of the Maui wildfires. The federal response in particular was very organized and grew rapidly over the course of the recovery operations. For example, once private property and commercial zones were cleared, the Environmental Protection Agency commenced household hazardous material removal, which allowed the residents and loved ones to re-enter their properties and safely retrieve valuables, including items of sentimental value. This immense federal response enabled the county and state to rapidly transition to long-term recovery operations. Throughout the recovery and response period, state federal resources also worked hard to support the County of Maui and adhere to the guidance and vision of Maui community leaders. Cultural considerations, historic preservation, and environmental planning have all been important priorities during the Maui wildfire response process, and our federal partners have been responsive to that emphasis throughout. In short, coordinated response to the Maui wildfires has been remarkable at all levels. My testimony will focus on the cooperation and accomplishments with respect to interagency coordination, interim and long-term housing, debris removal, and cost-share federal reimbursement. In support of the recovery efforts, the federal government has provided a wide range of resources, primarily via FEMA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Small Business Administration, Department of Interior, Economic Development Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services. For example, in the immediate aftermath of the wildfires, State of Hawaii and FEMA Region 9 established a joint recovery coordination group led by Luke Myers, the Hawaii State Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator, and Alana Kuhn, the Federal Disaster Coordinator. The scope, scale, and complexity of the fire's aftermath required a whole-of-community recovery approach, organized into 6 recovery support functions: community planning and capacity building, economic, infrastructure systems, health and social services, natural and cultural resources, and housing. The joint team effectively coordinated operational resource and policy issues. Longer-term recovery efforts have led the Hawaii Office of Recovery and Resiliency, or what we call ORR, which leads the state coordinated efforts of federal, state, county, and private partners. Last fall, the ORR worked closely with federal disaster recovery coordinators and the Interagency Recovery Coordination Group, which have coordinated federal recovery efforts. Interagency coordination has also been key to developing sheltering and housing solutions. Immediately following the wildfires, the County of Maui provided congregate shelters for displaced individuals. Meanwhile, Governor Green directed to get these individuals out of the congregate shelters and the survivors into non-congregate shelters as soon as possible. In support of that goal, Hawaii contracted the American Red Cross to manage the state's non-congregate sheltering program. For the complex debris removal, the state of Hawaii contracted the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE, as the prime contractor for the Maui's complex debris removal project. USACE's planning and communication with all stakeholders has been extremely inclusive and effective. In addition to subcontracting local companies, the USACE team contracted trusted cultural advisors and cultural monitors for the project. They maintained a clear communication by holding weekly community recovery meetings that ensure transparency and responsiveness to local concerns. In conclusion, the overall response for the Maui wildfires has been nothing short of extraordinary, and we're immensely grateful to the federal partners who have come alongside us in this effort. We look forward to continuing to work together as we recover and rebuild Maui. Once again, the state of Hawaii thanks the subcommittee for its attention in this matter, and we look forward to further discussion and collaboration. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, please know that my colleagues that are here and gathered today, as well as the wishes from the United States Congress, in particular, the committee that I represent, Government Reform and Oversight, wishes to tell you that we've come out here for the right reasons, and that is to not only tell you that we care about you, but also to listen. And we are delighted with your professional nature and your viewpoint of this meeting. So the gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Aloha mai kako, Chairman Sessions, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. While this hearing focuses on response efforts in Lahaina, we were also faced with multiple fires in Kula, Olinda, and Pulehu on August 8, 2023. We continue to mourn the tragic loss of 102 of our loved ones and the 2 that are still unaccounted for. In one night, 12,000 of our people were displaced, 2,200 homes and commercial buildings were destroyed, and numerous historical sites were lost, leaving debris scattered over more than 5 square miles. Despite this devastating loss, we moved forward acutely focused on restoring homes, schools, community centers, businesses, and natural habitat. Families remain in temporary housing and face mounting costs from mortgage payments that will be owed once forbearance expires. Survivors struggle with financial instability, child care and health care needs, and increasing mental health concerns. Our businesses and industries have endured severe economic loss. We're sincerely appreciative of the work of our federal partners. It is my hope that our testimony today will encourage continued support for Maui and ensure that survivors of the next inevitable disaster will benefit from our experience. I'm grateful for the response and leadership of FEMA Region 9 for their consistent and continued presence throughout this disaster. Most notable is how FEMA has adapted to our unique cultural and island community needs, including the effective use of cultural monitors and the flexibility to respond to emerging concerns. Due to our isolated location, the unique nature of our housing market, and our high percentage of renters, finding adequate housing near work, schools, and community posed a distinct challenge. Consequently, survivors dealt with the uncertainty and challenge of moving multiple times while in non-congregate housing, endured a burdensome process of complicated applications, and experienced confusion navigating FEMA eligibility requirements, all while suffering through post-disaster trauma. Although FEMA is designed to offer temporary housing solutions for survivors, many of these options were impractical for an island community already grappling with a severe housing crisis. Additionally, FEMA's rental assistance program posed unintended consequences negatively impacting our rental housing market island-wide, causing further distress for other Maui residents who were displaced unintentionally. Permanent housing options earlier in the response would have been ideal. Expanding FEMA's permanent housing construction program to states outside the continental U.S. could provide a viable approach to addressing long-term housing solutions. Also, integrating HUD earlier into the recovery process would also expedite permanent housing options. I also want to recognize the SBA for the approval of $405 million in low-interest disaster loans, which provided financial assistance to help Maui begin to rebuild. However, the perception that SBA funds are intended solely for businesses rather than individuals suggests that clearer messaging could help reduce misconceptions and delays in accessing critical funds. Next, I want to acknowledge the support of the EPA, which led our unique hazardous household waste disposal operations, including the collection and disposal of lithium-ion batteries from electric vehicles and solar panels. Also, EPA's water emergency team worked with county departments to expedite the restoration of our water systems and offered free inspections to help residents adhere to cesspool compliance issues. Lastly, I'd like to thank USACE for their crucial and expedited role in debris removal for residential and commercial properties and restoring infrastructure so our residents can begin to rebuild. I also applaud their remarkable achievement in constructing King Kamehameha III Elementary School's temporary campus in just 95 days, creating a learning environment for 350 students. Continued financial and programmatic support from our state and federal partners is crucial to the preservation and livelihood of our people and the success of this recovery. A special mahalo to our Hawaii congressional delegation, Governor Green, Lieutenant Governor Luke, and our state partners, our county workforce, including the 76 who lost their own homes, and our local community partners for their unwavering support through this most difficult time. Most importantly, I want to recognize the incredible strength of our people, many who have endured inconceivable suffering, but continue to push forward with incredible grit, sacrifice, and immeasurable courage. While we can rebuild structures, if we do not return Lahaina, to the very people who represent the spirit and the soul of our community, if we don't recognize the faces of our friends and our family as we repopulate, then we will have lost this battle for our people. And even one more family lost is one too many. Mahalo.
Mr. Mayor, we acknowledge and respect not only the effort that you and others who will speak today, but with great respect, I will recognize and do, as well as my colleagues, that each of you have a task today, and that is to represent people. Your words are sincere. Your accomplishments can and should be noted. But we are here also to look to the future about how we will continue to work with you based upon the past that we think is important. So for each of you who now follow the mayor, please know this, that we do recognize the heartfelt emotion that comes with this, and you will be given that time to express that, and we respect it. Sir, thank you very much. We now move to our next witness, Lauren Nahimi. The gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Aloha, Chairman Sessions and your distinguished members of your subcommittee. On behalf of the Hawaii Community Foundation, I'd like to acknowledge and mahalo the leadership of our country, the state of Hawaii, Maui County, the not-for-profit, business, and global donor community for their support and collaboration through this very intense, tragic, complex disaster. I would like to especially acknowledge the leadership of Governor Josh Green and Mayor Richard Bisson, and all of their staff for working nonstop to lead emergency and recovery efforts since the very beginning, while keeping the rest of the county and state operating. I would also like to mahalo our Senators Hirono and Schatz and U.S. Representatives Tokuda and Case for their continuous advocacy for Hawaii and keeping Maui's recovery top of mind for Congress. My written testimony submitted has a lot of background and supporting information, and I'll just highlight a few points. Our work in disaster support includes not only strategic grant making through the Maui Strong Fund, but also sharing information, convening, coordinating, and collaborating with a range of partners to optimize responsiveness to needs while leveraging philanthropic dollars to fill gaps and minimize overlaps with government resources. So what you do matters to us. To date, we have received $200 million in contributions, including $5.8 million in interest earnings that we have contributed back into the fund. We have not charged an administrative fee on the contribution, so the entire sum will go towards Maui's recovery. So far, we have awarded over 250 grants for $112 million, with $12 million more sitting in the pipeline for approval. We have raised funds independent of the Maui Strong Fund to support the operations administration of these funds. Because this recovery will be long and with a multi-billion-dollar price tag, a core part of our strategic focus is to do our very best to understand prioritized needs, complement and leverage public resources rather than duplicate, keep our eye out for the vulnerable, and be as data-informed as possible. Accordingly, we made an early commitment to partner with a few organizations and several strategic grants that would focus in on those who may fall through the cracks of public disaster resources and process, which I've outlined in my written testimony. What has been clear and consistent throughout our formal and informal data gathering via our partners, grantees, and survivors is that uncertainty surrounding current and future resources and timetables is a significant factor impacting the ongoing mental health, well-being, and recovering of our community. Uncertainty related to housing, which we've heard so much about, employment, and reconnection with neighbors and friends hinges largely on federally provided public resources and planning and execution efforts of the state and county. To start, while non-congregate shelters were a necessary and standard part of response to disasters of this kind that displace people from homes, the lack of certainty of placement, length of stay, and possibility of movement was repeatedly expressed as unsettling, and we also know very costly. In response, HCF collaborated with FEMA, the state, county, and other philanthropic organizations to develop a time-bound plan and committed very significant resources for housing for at least 18 months for 3,000 households, providing the certainty that families desperately sought. While the interim housing plan was a great demonstration for all of us working together, but still not perfect, challenges that still exist and need immediate attention include the unaffordable rents that have increased in ranges of 50 to 200% of pre-disaster levels, creating a sub-crisis of its own as local residents are displaced when leases are either not renewed or renewed with exorbitant increases. This is another group of disaster-affected residents who represent our friends, families, and critical contributors to our community and workforce, and many have either left or contemplating leaving. Additionally, there are very significant concerns regarding the impending resource cliffs when FEMA and other significant resources sunset as early as February 2025 without clear alternative paths and options for families. Improved forecasting and delivery of needs in affordable housing, living wage jobs, healthcare, and other family resources are required and must be solidified with a sense of urgency to reduce and eliminate long-standing uncertainty for families. A clear win to celebrate, as we've heard about, the United States Army Corps of Engineers has made significant progress ahead of schedule, with debris cleared and from residential properties and potable water restored to all of Lahaina, thanks to the EPA. It is even more crucial right now for homeowners to know what resources are available to rebuild and when. Additionally, certainty and urgent authorization of CDBG-DR funding is crucial to continue this very positive momentum, to accelerate recovery and reduce financial and mental health hardships for survivors. It is not clear what is holding this up. In closing, while our commentary has been focused on the recovery, we hope and believe that Maui can be a model not just for how a people and a place can prepare and respond to a disaster, but to ultimately rethink the economic and well-being construct for our broader Hawaii and other island communities. Mahalo for this opportunity to participate and share what we are doing, what we have learned, and what we look forward to. We also deeply appreciate your demonstration of care and commitment by being here in person, to listen, inquire, understand, and pursue informed action. We are ready to continue our participation and coordination with all parties to fully support the successful recovery and ultimate resilience of our friends and families on Maui. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kapu, thank you for being here today. You have been most respectful, I think, in your presentation as I've watched you these past several hours. We're delighted that you're here, and the gentleman is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Greetings to all committee and subcommittee representatives in assessing the federal government's response to 2023 Maui wildfire. Aloha. My name is Keamoko Kapu of Lahaina, Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. And my family are recognized lineal descendants to two valleys, Kahoma as well as Kauula. And we live on lands awarded to our families through the existing constitutional kingdom and the seat of government once situated here in Lahaina in 1848 till today. I am the youngest of 7 children of my father, Paul Kekai Kapu, who served in the United States Marine Corps. From 1950 to 1960, and my mother, Pualoke Ha'o, from Mokokeawe. Our organization, Naikani of Maui, was formed and founded back in 2011 as a 501c3 nonprofit organization to help our general community as a resource hub to our in-depth history of Lahaina and to assist in traditional protocols within the sensitivity of our customs, protocols, and beliefs. I have sat on many boards and commissions, such as the Maui County Cultural Resources Commission in 2001 to 2004, and reappointed to the commission as of 2023-2024. I also served on the Maui Lanai Island Borough Council to the State Historic Preservation Division from 2004 and the chairman from 2008 to 2012. Served on the Native Hawaiian Historic Preservation Council in advisory to the Board of Trustees of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs from 2004 to 2014. I also served on the West Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Council. It's a federal management agency in 2007-2014. I stand before you as a testament to a place that was almost erased, to total commercial and industrialization. Mekameme Third School, no longer here today. The Royal Compound be a reminder of how our paradise disappeared. Now that we are dealing directly with scattered remains throughout the entire campus grounds of the Royal Compound, known to many as the capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii, where a lot of our monarchical foundations once stood. Lahaina was known as the Venice of the Pacific, hence the name known by our elders, Malu Ulu Olele, the breadfruit grottos of Lele. The federal government's response had been great throughout the recovery process and beyond. Some hiccups when it comes to the protection of historic properties, especially when dealing with burials and understanding more of the roles of Hawaii burial laws through the Hawaii Revised Statutes and Administrative Rules, could need a lot of more clearing up and understanding on both the federal and state levels of governance when it comes to the rights of the general public's need to know should be a directive from the State Historic Preservation Division and the Maui Lanai Island Borough Council. We, Nai Kani o Maui, extend our gratitude to the federal government for all assistance in an expeditious way by prioritizing the needs of our community's health, safety, livelihood, for the benefit of our future generations tomorrow. In closing, I would just like to add, and as a kupuna in the back reminded to me, that it's very complex that we live, that we also got to remember that we're under the guise of Akua up above, that we also need to honor him, especially during these times of need. So in closing, I would just like to add, na kia koe opo mai ka ia e malama ia oi, me kako. May the Lord continuously bless each and every one of us, always. Mahalo no. Thank you.
Mr. Kepu, thank you very much. I will tell you, I think we pray to the same God. And we also have significant impact from Mother Nature. And whether you live in Waco, Texas, as I do, or whether you live on these islands, you come into contact with both. Your faith and resiliency was expressed today. I appreciate you taking time to be with us. I'd like to ask that you stick around for a few minutes more. But I think the power of your testimony is greatly appreciated. Gentleman now yields back his time. Mr. Patel, we're delighted that you're here. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Aloha, esteemed members. My name is Sneh Patel, and I stand before you today as the president of the Lahaina Town Action Committee. Before I share my experiences from this unprecedented event, I wanted to first just thank you all for being here in this physical space and coming to us rather than all of us coming to D.C. So really want to thank you for that and commend you. So greater resilience is what we seek in a world that continues to provide challenges. And I believe that by working together, we can share our collective wisdom, just as the ancestors of these lands once did. We can do better for ourselves and for generations to come. As I learned from Kemoku Kapu here, the future is in the past. For we got to ask ourselves, right? What kind of future are we leaving for our kids, for our keiki? Lahaina is not just a place. It's a cherished, sacred part of Hawaii's identity. And as we move forward, we are committed here to ensuring that it shines brightly again. Not just for today, tomorrow, but for future generations. As I mentioned, I am the current president for the Lahaina Town Action Committee. Our organization was founded nearly 40 years ago by business leaders in Lahaina. And the LAC has always strived to strike that balance between the economic vitality of Lahaina as well as the commercial, as well as the cultural and the historic. So, August 8th, that was a big event. I don't come here just as an individual representing businesses, but someone that's lived here 20 plus years in West Maui, married father of 3, and someone who's lost property as well. I've experienced the profound impacts of a disaster on both a personal and professional level. However, nothing compares to the heartbreak of the families who lost loved ones that day. So I take a moment to just honor them, those 102 lives. In the immediate aftermath of the wildfire, the businesses that remained standing were among the first to step up. There was no division or distinctions, just a unified effort to shelter, feed, and support those who had lost everything. Witnessing this firsthand, even under the heavy weight of the fire's aftermath, was a testament to our strength, the strength of our community. For weeks, we operated on a mutual foundation of mutual aid, doing whatever we could to support each other in this time of need. However, as the days turned to weeks, it became evident that our efforts, though valiant, were not sustainable without more structured support. And so I thank all the federal agencies that came, all the state agencies, everybody. Mahalo them, because tremendous effort. The destructions of the businesses along Front Street and other parts of Lahaina represent a monumental economic loss. But this is not just about individual businesses, but the economic and cultural heart of West Maui. We know tourism alone drove 70% of the economy, and many of the small businesses along Lahaina's historic Front Street were not only integral to the local heritage, but also key to the daily livelihood of thousands. Losing these businesses has meant losing a significant portion of our community's income, jobs, and security. For generations, Lahaina was not just a historic town, it was a hub of commerce, culture, education, and connection. There were restaurants, art galleries, museums, historic sites, and marine businesses. They all blended together to provide livelihoods for many and attracted visitors from all over the world. The destruction of the town is not just a financial blow, it represents a deep wound to the identity of West Maui. You can still feel the shockwaves that are already felt throughout this community. However, my greatest fear is that the tsunami yet to come, if we don't act fast with the right level of support, it's going to be too late. The wildfire, as you know, the mayor said, destroyed 2,200 structures, including around 800 businesses, which collectively generated approximately $2.7 million in daily revenue. Tourism declined from 7,000 daily to 2,000. That led to an estimated loss of $11 million per day in visitor expenditures. Overall economic losses, including property damage and business interruptions, are estimated to be between $4 to $6 billion. It's from UHERO and DBED. Business owners, many of whom were underinsured, are facing an uncertain future. Workers who depend on those jobs are now out of work, and we are losing people each day to the mainland. Given the level of devastation and the need to update much of the infrastructure, it may be years before businesses can even think about rebuilding and reopening. For many, the question is not just how they will reopen, but whether they can afford to at all. Even those that are back in operation are struggling, and those looking to restart are finding that lease rents have increased exponentially with the demand for commercial space, making it harder for them to get back on their feet. By the end of the first month following the fire, the Lahaina Town Action Committee began receiving calls from many of the businesses seeking answers, guidance, and a path. And in response, we facilitated a critical meeting on September 5th, 2023, with the support from State Senator Linda Coit and both the Maui Chamber of Commerce, Hawaii Chamber of Commerce. The meeting was attended by 100 businesses and key government officials, including the mayor, the governor, members of the various state agencies, department heads, Congresswoman Joe Takuda. Thank you. During the meeting, several immediate needs were identified, highlighting both the challenges faced and the opportunities for improvement and recovery efforts, specifically for small businesses. I know we're short on time. I have a lot of notes from that meeting I could share. So I have a lot of SBA comments that I can share. And I know out of respect for time, I'll conclude. So I thank you for your time. I look forward to working with all of you to find workable solutions that will allow our businesses and the community to recover and thrive once again. It's going to take all of us. We all need to be in the boat, navigating together.
Gentleman yields back his time. It does us good on this side of this dais to know that each of you have placed your hand on the pulse of emotion, because you were a part of living through this. You're a part of the day-to-day work that went on. You're a part of the creation of how you sustain people. There's been talk about God and the beauty of these islands, and the need to make sure that as we move forward, we do this together. I would hope that each of you understand that we respect you, and we do understand the importance of the emotion that is related not just to your historical background or the legacy that you respect so much, but also to that moving forward. So I hope that what we do today on this side of the dais is respectful back for you, and I have every reason to believe that it will be. But I want to personally thank you and the people who sit behind you. We did not think we could come out here and hold a normal hearing just where we would ask questions and then take the information and leave. We recognize this is a longer process. So with great respect, as the chairman of this subcommittee, I want to thank each of you. With that, we will now move to the distinguished gentlewoman from California for her 5 minutes. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor Bisson, I wanted to ask about, to return to housing, which is a big part of your testimony and something we talked about earlier. The truth is, we don't have enough affordable housing anywhere in the nation at this point. That's true in my home state of California. It is increasingly true, even in states that have historically had lower housing, like Mr. Sessions' state of Texas. But for a long time, Hawaii has been the most expensive state in the nation to buy a home. What's about the median typical home price here on the island?
$1.2 million.
Okay. And what is about the typical median income, if you know?
Well, I know what it would take for someone to afford a home today. You'd have to earn $200,000 a year to afford buying a house now. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would have been $76,000 to afford a home here. So that's
a huge change.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's just not realistic to expect people to buy a 1.2, or let's even say they get something smaller, $1 million home off a median wage, which right now in Maui, the island as a whole, is about $88,000 a year. It was too expensive to live here before the fire. So here's the point I want to make, and I want to ask the sort of panelists to respond. You can't expect the market, and Mr. Fenton, I'm kind of talking to you here too. You cannot expect the market to fix something after a natural disaster when the market was already deeply dysfunctional beforehand. So in other words, where you already had an affordable housing crisis before the fire, and what the fire has done is deepen and worsen that problem, but it has also created a spotlight on it and drawn attention to it. And just to highlight this point, from 2018 to 2023, in that 5 years in which housing prices increased, do you know how many net housing units were added on Maui?
I don't have the exact number, but it was a very small number.
According to our research,
Right.
Maui actually lost 175 units. So I think what I'd like to ask each of you to think about is, how do we improve this? We can't just rely on the market, because the market wasn't getting it done before. It's not going to suddenly get it done now. And some of the federal interventions, in some ways, made the market worse, more difficult. Some of them, I think, will help and make it better. But we just had a broken market. Right now, what share of residential zoned, what share of the island that is zoned for residential property is zoned for multifamily housing? Do you know?
I don't know the percentage, no.
It's, according to our research, a little over 18%. So that's higher, by the way, than the rest of Hawaii, which is around 7.5%. So I think we're going to need some flexibility about what types of homes we build, what kinds of materials we use to build homes, what those homes look like. And we have to do that in a way that respects the heritage, the preferences, the cultural significance. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. But I guess I would just say, the question I'd like to hear you sort of talk about, and I'll start with you, Mayor, is what do we need to change to create a better market for affordable housing in Maui? Because if we don't answer that, we're not going to be able to figure out in Lahaina, where we have a fire on top of that.
Yeah, I think the first answer I would offer you is infrastructure, including water. Water is probably the greatest barrier, at least for the west side. And I know Mr. Kapu can speak to this, having lived through this for the time he's lived out here. 76% of the water on the west side is privately owned. 24% is owned by government or the county. And that is, again, one of the barriers for us to work with. I mean, of course, you can try to increase your capacity which is what we have been trying to do, which is to dig more wells to try to offer that. I mean, there are other things we can work with the private purveyors to try to acquire more of that water back. But even if you acquire the water, it's allocated by the state agency that allocates how much water we're allowed to take out of our water systems. So even if you, let's say, take over some of that 76%, that water is already allocated to somebody else anyway. So those are some of the challenges that I've learned of since becoming mayor. And part of infrastructure for us is, of course, cesspools being converted so that they can be put on the county's system, wastewater system. So increasing wastewater capacity, you must have that before you can add more homes. So I would say that's probably the biggest issue is infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think that is an area where rebuilding can give us a fresh start and an opportunity to improve. As you mentioned, before I wrap up, Ms. Name, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. I wish our CEO, Michael, was here, because prior to the fire, this was an area of huge focus called House Maui, and informed now by the fire, for sure that probably has to bump up on steroids. And so we're really thankful that that's going to be a continued focus for the Hawaii Community Foundation. And we also just recently hired Keanu Lauhi as my replacement, and she will cover both the Maui recovery as well as focusing on House Maui. And because she has a lot of the relationships locally here and also with the county and a lot of experience there, the hope is that there will be this collective, because as Mayor said, it's going to take state, county, community, cultural advisors to all come up with a time-bound, measured kind of goal that everybody has to shoot for. And that's going to require innovative strategies that we're learning from this disaster that we can implement to make sure that it truly is affordable based on what the median household income is.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think this is really a lesson for communities across the United States who are grappling with affordable housing problems. that are affecting everything from rising homelessness problems, which we're dealing with in California and many other places, to being able to attract businesses to their communities. You have to get ahead of this. Because it just makes the recovery that many times harder. And so I encourage everyone here to continue to be in conversation with each other, but also to be innovative, because I think redoing what you were doing isn't going to get you where you ultimately need to be, because you were already in a whole a struggle before you started. And we are facing this exact same challenge in California, that rebuilding would leave us behind. Because we were starting from that place in terms of housing affordability. So I'll yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentlewoman, Dakota, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And again, thank you to the panel. We've walked together many, many days. It feels like years, but truly grateful to have all of you out there on the front lines doing what you're doing every single day. To piggyback, to Representative Porter's question, in many ways, this fire ripped back the curtain for how we have struggled to just survive here in Hawaii from a housing perspective. Permitted versus unpermitted, you just do what you got to do. Many of us living on top of each other just to be able to make ends meet. And then you see the crisis when something like fire happens, and suddenly displacement is for not just a few, but literally thousands and thousands of people who have been living together just to be able to get by. And we see it not just here in Lahaina and Maui, we see it on every single island. And so it is about being creative. It is also about how we build housing people can afford. I never talk about affordable housing anymore, because even that is out of reach for most of our people right now. And so, but looking at it, Mayor, you talked a little bit about infrastructure. General Hara, please chime in as well. I know we have the recovery plan coming to fruition towards the end of the year, hoping that is on track, but also just wondering that, as we've heard a lot of comments today about needing to move faster to rebuild, and permits being issued right now for various rebuilding and houses here in Lahaina. I just want to make sure that as we are issuing these permits and we're quickly looking to rebuild, are we making sure that we keep all of our options open to making sure we rebuild back better? Having visited Paradise, California, and much of it was centered around keeping people safe and making them feel safe, so removing the fire risk. So when we talk about the need potentially to underground utilities, to widen streets that were not wide enough to be able to allow people a quick exit and whatnot, are we making sure that the rebuilding, the recovery plan includes things that will make our community as a whole safe and reflects the vision of the community, that it's not at cross purposes with just issuing permits quickly? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, it's a balance
Yeah.
that has to be struck. So there have been 156 permits that have already been submitted, and 48 of those have been approved. And this is just in Lahaina and a couple in Kula. And there are 20 homes that are currently being rebuilt right now in Lahaina. I think your point about having the material be fire resistant, fire retardant is obviously part of the messaging. That having people build safer is, of course, something that's been also promoted. But what I wanted to share is, for us, probably our main policy is to try to put the same people back in the same homes on the same lands, because the risk that is threatened by is people who are leaving, and building it back nice and safe, but having it be an entirely new group of people occupying would not be our goal. And so there's the balance that I was just talking about. There are very big differences between Paradise and Lahaina in terms of the makeup of the community. That was more of a retirement community. It didn't have the type of industry here, and they struggle for rebuilding because lots of that community decided not to return. And of course, here we want our people to return, and so there have been some differences. But I would say you're absolutely right. We have to balance the speed with the safety.
And not necessarily impede the speed, but we have to make sure the planning and the approval of permits reflects perhaps even everyone's desire, including those homeowners applying for those permits, desire to build back smarter, And if we keep the exact footprints, are we precluding ourselves from building safer? So undergrounding, widening, those types of things. And so I just hope that all of that is in parallel, but not just in parallel, they kind of overlap each other, as I've been talking about. So we're not approving quickly or too quickly a lot of these permits to rebuild, and at some point negating the opportunity for us to actually build in improvements that the entire community wants, which could be those underground utilities and wider streets, perhaps even cultural corridors, those types of things. So I would just say we have to step back always and remember what is the big picture vision the community has presented, and making sure we reflect that in the plans as well as permitting and other types of decisions that go through. And I know that takes a lot of political and community will and courage as well at the end of the day, but I think that will be called upon us to be able to do that, to make sure that what we build for the future is in fact the vision that our people have asked for. At the end of the day, keep them safe. As well, and Lahaina, a place where people can live. So thank you for that. And I would just like to ask one question of Kemoku. This could have worked out completely differently in terms of a federal response to a disaster in one of our most sacred historical and cultural places. I think you and I both know that. There could have been a time and a place where we wouldn't all be sitting in this same room together talking about how we've worked to get to this point. So what made the difference to you? How was this different? You know, you have that historical institutional knowledge. He's young too, by the way, so I'm not saying he's old, but how was this different from any other federal response that you've experienced or heard about or seen? And how was it better? So when we look forward, these are things, we have to correct things definitely. We have to fix little tweaks, as you said, hiccups. But how do we institutionalize this because it was in fact better?
Well, in my testimony, I kind of mentioned that I sat on many boards and commissions. So having that advantage to look at our town in a more different way, and I think this has a lot to do with one of the problems that we face when we start talking about affordable homes and things like that, because we got to realize that, you know, in Hawaii, it's really extremely different, especially when you talk about burial laws and you talk about, you know, any kind of infrastructure, especially during the first phase of the development, they found bones when they started doing a lot of the transmission lines. And that's a big snag. So for us as Naya County, and as many years that I've been involved in not just the review, but planning as well as consulting with things such as the cultural corridor, why that's important, is to make sure that we have people on the ground to address the needs of our historic properties mainly. And why that is important is because Naya County of Maui, when we originally started in the beginning, we never thought we would take on a big responsibility such as being involved in this recovery efforts. I went from a 501c3 nonprofit organization of only 8 individuals in our organization to 62 cultural monitors and observers. So being provided the opportunity to step up and be a part of the solution and not the problem, I've been able to hire a lot of the families that lost homes, families that lost families. And it kind of changed the atmosphere pertaining to how we would dive into our community to make sure that our community, although being agitated, to know that we have not just Hawaiians, but also multi-generational families that we hired to be a part of the monitoring and observation that was going throughout the town. So that was kind of great. In the beginning, I thought, you know, first of all, that, okay, somebody putting me under the bus. But it was greater than that. I think one of the greatest opportunities was sitting with a lot of the contract people that came from afar, all the different primes, working with MIMA, HAIMA, different contractors and all that, and really understanding what the importance of why we were there. Our priority was to make sure that we focus on the residential side to get our families back home, because in the beginning, County of Maui was one of the hubs that was set up to provide provisions for our community, food, water, resources, and we did that periodically during the time when we were selected to be a part of the recovery efforts. County of Maui's cultural monitoring program, being involved with a lot of the architectural design people that was hired, the contractors, the archaeologists, stuff like that. So it gave us an opportunity to look at the layers of different governances on how we can expedite it to make sure that the priority was to get the residents home. That was the first priority for us, to make sure that we provide whatever needs and necessities. We're kind of like the watchdogs out there to make sure that the communities were protected, the properties were protected. Our whole responsibility as Nye County was we're the first and last defense to protect the integrity of our town. Although we were kind of a little bit under cognito, but I think sometimes you got to take that stance today because how we need to think expeditedly on how we're going to take care of our communities. So mahalo for that question. I hope I answered it. Thank you.
Very good. Mahalo. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Distinguished gentleman, Mr. Case recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor, I want to follow up on Rep. Tokuda's questioning on essentially what we're building back to. Because from the very beginning, one of the big questions has been, what is our target at the end of the day? What is the Lahaina that we envision and that we want to bring back to life? And it may not be the same exact Lahaina as before. And actually, I'm not sure it should be from a fire prevention, wildfire prevention, and that's before you get to the community's concepts about how to bring back Lahaina as a vibrant, residential and business and cultural community. And if you look at Mr. Fenton's, charts that are in my head, and we've all been in the briefings, the sequence depends on a decision sooner or later about what that plan is for Lahaina. And I say this to you as a very practical matter because from a federal funding perspective, which is going to have to fund this, if we are, as your delegation and others, successful in opening up that next large tranche of federal money in the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief, CDBG-DR funding, and as you go to the private sector and others for partnerships along those lines, you've got to have a plan. Otherwise, the money's not going to be, it's going to be very hard for us to say to the feds, hey, we got the CDBG-DR funding and we're ready to fund it, but by the way, we don't know what we're funding for. And so the real question here is, I recall Mr. Fenton's charts. I'm not pinning it on him because it was a question for everybody, but sometime around this period, there would be that decision. I mean, not exactly right now, but soon, not later. And so I'm just Lahaina was in many areas non-conforming use. And so obviously we now have the problems of non-conforming use and how to work through that. The conditions of much of Lahaina facilitated or probably facilitated wildfire exposure. Density, spacing, setbacks, street width, et cetera, wires above ground. And so I guess my question is, where are you on that decision? I know it's a complex decision. It's a decision, for the community, for the elected leaders, and we've always said from the very beginning, that's Maui's decision. But when does that decision come along? Because it's not too far away that we're really going to need that decision to have been made.
I agree with you. Thank you, Councilmember. Congressman, the long-term recovery project is due to be out the draft in October. That's a result of many, many community meetings that we've held and also neighborhood meetings that our Office of Recovery staff has been pursuing. One of the, mantras we've had is that this would be community-led and government-supported. Keeping in mind that we're not planning a subdivision that is owned by the county. These are all privately owned properties that we're needing to get input from, some that will be impacted more than others. When we talk about Front Street and the business community, also privately owned lands that are impacted by shoreline rules, by SMA rules, by so many rules. So I guess the challenge is taking all of that into account and putting that into the plan that I mentioned to you. We had our deadline was to be by the end of the year, and October is where we think the draft will come out, the first draft. Again, that's going to be a result of the meetings and what has been told to us by the community in those meetings. It's a compilation of those of that feedback, so that it mirrors what we've been receiving. Totally understanding evacuation, health and safety factors, streets, sizes of streets. We have a lot of data, a lot of information that's also been factored into those decisions. But you're right, it's a challenge to try to all be on the same page, and it's probably going to start with a recommendation based on, again, what we've heard, and I'm sure it'll go through a few different drafts as we put it out to the community.
That's really good. So the process, I assume, would be you'd put the drafts together, it'd go out to the community for comment, but sooner or later it has to be converted into a county ordinance, right? Possibly even amendments to state law for SMAs and that kind of stuff. So we've got some, it's not as if it's going to be done by the end of the year. It's just that the plan itself is out there and hopefully agreed to in concept. But question along those lines. So you already have, I think you said I have 157 permit applications, 40 or 50 in process, 20 approved. Are they 20 being built?
20 homes being built right now. There are 48 that are approved.
Right.
Yeah.
And are those? I assume that those 20 are being built in accordance with current codes. So.
Yeah, those are permitted.
Right.
Those are all permitted.
So they would have waived any non-conforming use issues, or they didn't have any, or, they're being built according to some understanding of what Lahaina is going to look like afterwards, right? Because the houses are being rebuilt as opposed to any modifications to, lot lines or anything like that.
I think I understand your question. My answer is yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Gentleman yields back his time. It doesn't take a lot to have to sit here and listen and conjure up in your mind the undertaking that you're all involved in. We heard stories of roads that were too narrow, people that were trapped, exits that did not necessarily represent an emergency, may have represented daily life. I know there's an undertaking here, and my federal partner friends, as we spoke, and the mayor was in some of these because he and I spoke about the avenues that need to be addressed. But it is going to require a big undertaking. Are you going to take someone's title to a land and make it bigger or change it? What impact does that have on the next person? How do you take and widen a street knowing that you run into people's title? How do you come and say, we want our infrastructure for electricity or other means? How do you dig the hole for that and come up with the agreement from the community? How do you cross lines? Our prayers are with you. We are not here to try and solve those, but I think you have adequately told me what I think I knew and understood as I watched this circumstance as it evolved. I think you have properly addressed each other. I think you've shown respect and dignity. I think our federal partners have attempted to do that. But I will tell you that people on this side also are trying to weigh and measure not just money and time and effort, but we're trying to count on you to come up with some of those answers so that we're able to correspondingly find out, as your members are, how do we work to make sure it can be accomplished? This is a serious undertaking. This is something that you could hope and pray it never happens in your lifetime. But I think that I'm looking at a group of people that are up to it. And I want to pass to each of you, not as we leave here, but as we listen and work through in our minds. This requires a lot of people, not just you, to have cooler heads, to have thoughtful ideas, and to work together. And there's an old saying in Texas, when the going gets rough, the rough get going. And they really work together, and they really find common elements. You may have heard me earlier, but the mayor said to me, you know, Congressman Sessions, when we get 10 people in a room, you get 10 different ideas. I would say to you that I would challenge you to find a way to look at this where you can come up with that idea. And I'd like to think that when you have done the heavy lifting, that you can come back to your delegation and they will find common practice to be able to approach us. We did not come here to hear negative things. We came here to hear things about reality. And the reality of what you presented us with, and that we're respectfully coming back to you to say, is we think there was some flexibility allowed by your federal partners. We think we have to make it work. And we think in Congress, we've got to work together to make that work. I have admiration for you. I have respect. There are communities in the district that I represent that have lost everything by a twister that came and went in 48 seconds. Tore up lives, shifted ideas, and gave people a reason to be thankful, but also to fear. And I want you to know I think you're up to it. Is there any member here that wishes to extend with a second round? Mr. Case?
No, thank you.
Ms. Porter? Yeah, my adult is telling me, hold on. And I can handle that. So we'll ask Ms. Dakota when she comes back. So I've been doing this for a few minutes anyway, trying to be nice, but I wanted to say what I said. So I'm going to say right now, pending her coming back, and we get this, she needs to be given that opportunity, that I want to thank my staff for the professional work that they have developed. I want to thank my colleagues and their staff. I want to thank them for the time. And I also want to thank, as I did during the 6 years when I was chairman of the Rules Committee, for the stenographers who've taken time to come and learn how to listen to California, Hawaiian, and Texan again, as they try and take these words that are most genuinely and heartfelt. If someone reads the words, they may be able to decipher them as being different from normal hearings that we have. But for those of you who are here, I've been told this is on C-SPAN and will be available to people across the United States of America and for you, because I'm sure they'll replay it tonight, because I'm sure my wife will see me. But what I want to say to you is that if you fail to watch the TV, you will fail to see the real names, work, prayers, emotions, and resiliency that has been exhibited today by this panel and the first panel. That I offer support and prayer and believe that we have done the right thing. But I want to say this, it's the people that sit behind you that also have to feel like they got a fair shot at hearing and understanding. And so I would encourage my young mayor and each of you to make sure that you're clear when you speak, that you enunciate those things that are still hopes and dreams, and that your member of Congress will make sure that she transmits those to us, I think appropriately, and we will listen. The gentlewoman's recognized for any closing statement she would choose to make. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. And first of all, again, Mr. Chair, to you, we've been having these discussions literally for months and months about when was the best time, the most appropriate time, who to bring forward, what to see when you were here. I cannot thank you enough for just the aloha you have shown our people. And I think just from the two panels today, you've seen that there's been so much work done, and there's so much professional and personal commitment that each one of them brings to really making sure that we not just help people heal and recover, but that we actually come back so much stronger, and that we reflect the Lahaina and the Maui, upcountry Maui, as well, and the Hawaii, that we want to be going forward into the future. And so, as I said in the very beginning when I started, and I'll say it again, it has been a really fast and long year for all of us. I think when we look around the room at the faces, when we hear the names, when we hear the bright spots and what we've been able to accomplish together, for many of us, it triggers back all these memories of where we were, what we're experiencing, both the highs and the lows. And so it has been quite a trying year for us, but to be able to give us this opportunity in our home, in this space, to be able to share where we've come from, and more importantly, what we see for the future and how we can do better and be stronger going forward. That is truly a blessing for us that you would be willing to do this, whereas many times it is just what you get in writing, or it's whoever happens to be in D.C. to be able to share that. So this is really meaningful for our community to have this opportunity, and I know that there's plenty of folks in this room right now who have been strong leaders for this community, many watching online right now, that have really stood up. And so I wish you could meet all of them during your time here, because I tell you, they would tell you the stories and they would paint the picture of why the relationships have been so meaningful, and they will be lifelong. Folks like Bob, you can't go anywhere. You will always, as I said, become an aina here and part of the ohana, and both you as well. Thank you, Chair, Representative Porter. Taking the time to be here shows your commitment, the kuleana you feel to making sure that whatever happens going forward is done pono, is done right. So truly feel blessed to have been a part of this. And again, just really want to thank you and thank everyone here for making this possible. Thank the teams, the folks that sit in the back sometime, but who made sure that all of this happened in a way that will be respectful, as you said, and sensitive to the community. So thank you again. Thank you to my colleague, Ed Case. While this is no longer his district, it was his district, he always makes sure, and we both do, that the needs of our state as a whole are represented in the halls of Congress. So thank you again. Mahalo, everyone.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Without objection, all members that are here have 5 legislative days within to submit material and additional written questions for the witnesses. I would expect that the witnesses will respond back. Don't worry about that, but accordingly, so that we may put this entire matter together. Seeing no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you very much.